Hey everyone, welcome back to the afternoon session of day 2 of the 2026 Virginia Cannabis Conference. We are ready to start our next panel, which is medical cannabis panel, Ask a Practitioner. So I hope you have your questions ready. I'm going to turn it over to our panel in just a minute.
Okay, we're live. My name is Dawn Adams, Dr. Dawn Adams. I am a nurse practitioner and I run RBA Telecare. I'm here with Michael. Michael, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Michael Johnson. I'm a pharmacist, practiced retail pharmacy for quite a few years and then moved to the cannabis space. We started with Dharma Pharmaceuticals and have been purchased by Green Thumb Industries, and we're still plugging along managing the Virginia team for them.
And you guys do a great job. Really love Ride Dispensaries. They're excellent, top quality to work with. First, I'd just like to thank JM Benini for all the tremendous work putting on this conference. It is cold and icy and gross outside. And so I'd also like to thank the brave people who are here in this room. Even if they just had to brave the elevator, it's still very cold. So appreciate you being here. Today we're just really looking to answer any questions you might have about medical cannabis. Medical cannabis for me is something that I've been practicing in fairly exclusively, although not exclusively, for the last 5 years. And to that end, I have really focused all of my energies on making better patient experiences. So what I thought I would start off with, and then Michael, please jump in, or people with questions, is just kind of how a clinician approaches medical cannabis, because I think often when people think about it, they think about products. And really, that is not where I start as a clinician. I think about symptoms. Many people come for issues with sleep or anxiety, pain. Those are probably the top ones, although there's many other issues. And so cannabis is likely not the first thing that they tried. So they're also coming with frustration and concerns about maybe experiences they had with cannabis when they were younger, or things that they've heard about often, but not always, but often sort of rooted in misinformation. So when we think about medical cannabis, I'm really looking at what's going on for you, what have you tried in the past, what has your experience been with cannabis, and what are you looking for? Because most people are not looking to be high. They're actually looking for symptom control or to just feel balanced. You know, the beauty of cannabis as a medicine is it's working within a system that you were born with. Most people didn't know about it. We didn't know about it generally until the 90s, and that's called the endocannabinoid system. And as it turns out, the THC and some of the cannabinoids, they actually mimic our body's chemicals, the primary ones being AG2 and anandamide. And so the purpose of those is homeostasis, which is just a big word for balance. So when you're using cannabis, what you're trying to actually do is use the least amount of the product to achieve that balance again. And for many people, cannabis works quite well, but that is not the case for everybody. And that's why it's so important to look at it as a tool and not just a random primary treatment, at least from a clinician standpoint. What are your thoughts, Michael?
Honestly, I feel like a lot of people have been self-medicating with cannabis for years. They didn't really understand exactly what they were doing, but they knew it provided relief. And now that we're actually developing a more scientific model, I feel like we're starting to be able to dig in and figure out what piece of cannabis and what amount are being helpful for people. Personally, I've seen several different things happening. Utilizing different terpenes, I've noticed severe changes in blood sugars that have been very positive. As a 45-year type 1 diabetic, it's allowed me to reduce insulin usage. So you reduce insulin usage, you also reduce weight. So overall, it's been a very balancing product for myself and my previous experience, like back in the days of, high school, college, illicit market, and never had a positive experience. It was always a negative. And now, and not every product is the right suit for every person, but when you find your product, you can really find excellent benefits. And I'd really like to, I've been starting to study the terpenes a little further, because I'm seeing effects from different phenotypes that have, one may have the similar effects and one may not, even though they have similar terpene profiles.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you say that, because just in the last 3 days, I've had 2 patients in particular tell me they've lost 35 pounds in the last year. And it's not that cannabis is a weight loss drug, it's just that cannabis is helping to manage symptoms that sort of relate to that or relate to their struggles relative to weight. And so it's been really helpful. Sometimes it's the pain relieving effects that allows them to be more mobile. Sometimes it is the effects on appetite, either decreasing it or allowing them to eat better quality food. It's really interesting how much it can at times decrease anxiety. But what for me, this conversation around terpenes becomes the primary conversation I'm having with patients. In fact, over the last 5 years, I've asked a question about how do these products work. So that I spent 2 years writing a book. I'm going to plug it because I spent 2 years writing it. It's called, there you go. And basically the way this book is written, I really try to fill a gap in the market. It is a conversation with me, so it's very conversational in style. However, it also has, if you're interested, the science behind it in each subsection, along with an extensive reference list. And it's dated through 2025, so it's the most current research that I can find. So it's very steeped in research, but hopefully in a conversational style. There's chapters and chapters and chapters on terpenes, and the reason I focus on terpenes a lot is because in Virginia's market, but not exclusively, in most markets, cannabis has often become a very THC-centric product. I've noticed even in the last 5 years in Virginia, many of the cannabinoids have been sort of squeezed out, and yet the terpene profiles remain fairly strong. And when you have a range of product, let's just say in flower, for example, and the range generally, if you're selecting, let's just say in a hybrid lane, you may still have 20 products between 21 or 19 and 28% THC. And I usually tell my patients, if you can tell me the difference, I'll give you $100, because it's not the THC. What the difference is going to be is the rest of the profile. And that's the beauty of cannabis medicine, is that there is this extensive profile, and you can sort of sub-tailor the product to the symptoms. And what we find is that there are narratives around these terpenes, like certain terpenes do X, Y, and Z. But again, this is such a system of your unique metabolism that doesn't always mean what works for one person's anxiety, sleep, etc. It would be exactly the same product. Is that what you're finding, Michael?
It is. And the other piece that I think we really need to tie it to, as an American society, we're very high cortisol. Cortisol causes a lot of other issues and depletes our other hormones. And, if you look across the board in the US, we're kind of at almost what I would call a hormone emergency across half of the US.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of that is due to hypercortisolism. And by achieving homeostasis through the use of cannabis, you're reducing those cortisol levels and allowing the body to kind of return to normal. And I feel like that's a big play of it.
Yeah, I think that's probably a big piece of it. I also, like, one of the things I like about my practice is it's really an excuse to talk to the patient about their whole holistic health system, right? Our food supply has really destroyed our metabolisms.
Sure.
And so because that is so poor, we are having, I think, at least what I'm seeing, is an epidemic of anxiety like nobody's business. I think that has a lot to do with our gut, a lot to do with our low vitamin D levels, and our low innate magnesium levels that we used to get from food. So, I mean, I often, just don't talk about cannabis. I talk about, like, what else is going on for you? Are you doing breathing exercises? Are you able to move? I mean, there's a lot about balancing out the human system, and that's why cannabis is very much a tool and not a singular answer, but used in the way that is very personalized can be the difference between getting a good night's sleep, which balances, your ability to handle stress, as well as help you heal your inner hormone interplay inside your body. And so that's why cannabis as a tool, when used a particular way, can be so great, is that it's just not attacking one piece of the puzzle. It often has like a domino effect, making, if we reduce our cortisol, if we're able to get better sleep, if we have better pain control, then we have decreased anxiety, we have improved energy. There's a whole host of potential symptoms that it resolves, just because you're actually getting better sleep and healing and reducing your cortisol by getting your biorhythms back in sync and things like that. So that's one of the reasons I think cannabis is such an awesome and fascinating medicine.
100% agree.
I'm curious as to whether we've sparked any questions, or if there's anybody in the real world out there. Oh, there's one in the back here too.
There are questions out there in the real world, and let's go ahead and get into those. First up, we have Radhika's question. Many of my customers are older and are on quite a few medications, which they would like to supplement or replace with cannabis. How do we make safe recommendations to them? As you can see right there, a little bit on the screen, Radhika has a CBD store that's compliant with state law in Virginia called Own Baked, and this is how she's asking the question.
Yeah, I think that's a really important and responsible question. I see a lot of patients who are older too. Generally speaking, there's not a lot of super direct concerns about using small amounts of cannabis, even with medications. But there are interactions, like for SSRIs or blood thinners. There are specific things that we as clinicians, Michael as a pharmacist, we're looking for those interactions so that we can say, hey, it doesn't mean you can't use cannabis. What it means is we need to pay attention. We need to go low and slow. We need to find out, is this in any way impacting the way your medication currently works for you? As far as if you're talking like direct supplements, again, unless you're sort of dealing with something like St. John's wort, which kind of is in the same pathway of the liver that is metabolized. Again, you don't really have to say don't use it. It's more about really going low and slow. The more you understand as a person, who is in retail, for example, of cannabis, the more you understand about the profiles of whatever it is that you're selling, I think you can have some guidance around, well, these particular terpenes and cannabinoids can help with anxiety and sleep or inflammation. But either way, just because they can help doesn't mean they, one, will, and two, you really want to go at the lowest dose possible in the safest environment, and then adjust accordingly. Because what I tell people is, if you didn't sleep last night, the fact that you took a quarter of a gummy and didn't sleep the next night is not the end of the world. But if you take a whole gummy and then you feel like crap, or you fall, or you're dizzy, or whatever, or you feel anxious from too much THC, now you don't want to experience that again. So going low and slow is always your best option, and being patient and understanding that this is a very personalizable drug, if that's a real word.
100% agree. The first motto we use is low and slow. The other thing to really think about is cross tapers. If you're going to begin cannabis for anxiety and you have someone already using alprazolam, as we reduce the alprazolam and bring in the cannabis, you want to make sure one is going up and one is going down, so that you're not getting too much intoxicating effects from both. That's our goal, is to replace the original pharmaceutical. Then we want to make sure we're kind of doing that cross so that we're not initiating a withdrawal effect.
100%, absolutely. I think that is another piece, is that For people that have been on SSRIs in particular, or NSRIs, which have horrible withdrawal side effects, or benzodiazepines, or opiates even, if your goal is to reduce or replace, you definitely want a taper schedule, something that's almost predetermined, so that you're not just randomly like, oh, I think I'll try this, because withdrawal is really difficult for people, and you're just better off, again, you're just better off just always going slower than you think. Yes, sir. Hi.
Hello. My name's Ian. Been coming to the conference for a couple of years. I actually had a couple of research questions. If you guys don't mind, I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Two specific disorders that I noticed or come across in my research is one pertaining to epilepsy, whether it be like the Charlotte's Web tests or...
Did you say epilepsy?
Yeah, one epilepsy, just basically by using like CBD over the THC dominant for, combating like different types of epileptic seizures, whether it be grand mal or petit. And then my other, part of that question is also, I recently read about a couple of groups at the University of Alexandria in like Egypt. They were doing some research in regards to certain types of cannabis extracts, terpenes, what have you, and preventing like apoptosis, I believe, in some cancer cells for like rat experiments. I just wanted to hear you guys' thoughts on that, and if, with like kind of today's administration going after like NIH and stuff like that, would there be a possibility to possibly do a confirmation here in the States, or maybe just any type of research in those two areas?
You want me to go, or you go, Michael?
Go right ahead.
So first of all, my understanding relative to the research around cannabis and seizure disorders in general is that CBD dominant products are best for that. There is a lot of research that's available that will give you different results. I think ultimately the way America operates in the pharmaceutical space is that American studies matter the most, right? So I don't think that's true, but I think that's the way American scientists and sort of American medicine purports, evidence. So yes, there have been studies relative to cannabis and cancer. I think there's also a lot of subjective reports around cannabis and cancer. If and when, and I have very strong feelings. I feel like cannabis should be deregulated, not reclassified, right? Because it's absolutely stupid to just give it to the pharmaceutical companies to bastardize the products into like incremental parts that they oversell. And this is a natural medicine, right? But whether it's declassified or reclassified, there becomes, and first of all, we don't know what that means, right? Reclassification, like it would actually have to be formally reclassified, not just an order to like, you need to do this now. I mean, it has to go through the TDA. So when those things happen, yeah, there'll be research to affirm in America, what's valid and what isn't. The problem with that, at least in my opinion, Michael, you can say what your thoughts are. My problem with that is that, again, much of the research on medicine is done on white men, okay? And it ends up being a product that says, this is what you take, this is how much you take it, and this is how often you take it. Cannabis doesn't work like that. Cannabis is something that, I could give you and you the same product for the same condition, and you guys have totally different responses. So how do you do a standard double-blind, controlled study in that space? So, who knows what will actually happen? But you're right. There's lots of research out there. I think the responsible thing to do is to take as many good sources of research and sort of like weigh them against whatever your objective is and see what you think is reasonable.
I feel like we're better staying with the natural substance as we have And I mean, as a pharmacist, I will plainly say pharmaceutical companies come in and bastardize a molecule. And, if you just look at the one CBD that is approved by the FDA, Epidiolex, you can be upwards of a cost of $80,000 a year. And it's only approved for certain diagnosis, but we can get CBD all day long. And, it's the same product, but the big thing that I think we really need to be watching is entourage effect, because singling out the molecules does not produce the same result as the entire molecule, the entire structure. So I think our biggest mistake is trying to limit like per active ingredient and try to isolate and only utilize the isolate.
Exactly. I actually wrote an op-ed about that, published in the Richmond Times on the 25th of December, exactly about that. That's really a problem of taking the pharmaceutical approach. I think we have a question in the room in the back. Hi.
Hi, my name is Colton, and I was going to get you to touch on a little bit. Obviously, you touched on the new cannabis user needing to take a smaller dose to start out with, and obviously just jumping into a full 100 milligram edible or something like that, and ruining their future experiences. However, I do know that in certain states, for instance, I'm from the state of Mississippi, where they've got a THC cap in the state, and so really affects certain products such as like Rick Simpson oil. I have a mother, for instance, that was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and so she was somebody who didn't drink or really like to have an altered state whatsoever. But a lot of my cannabis clients provide us with Rick Simpson oil during treatments, and unfortunately it wasn't for her, but I know that a lot of other people have had a lot of good experience. So I was going to see you kind of touch on that, and for someone like her that doesn't like to be that out of it, what other options are there? And then also, if you could just touch on the benefits of Rick Simpson oil and how important it is.
Michael, do you want to start?
Honestly, I couldn't hear the end of the question, so if you want to start off.
He's basically asking, well, he essentially said that, if I'm understanding the question, please correct me if I'm wrong, that in his estimation, Rick Simpson oil is very important for many people. It didn't work well for his mom, but he thinks that it's important, and that he wanted to know what are the other options when people don't either want or tolerate RSO, and also just to speak more about RSO. Am I correct?
Right.
RSO, Rick Simpson oil, is typically basically an unrefined crude. So it is a full spectrum product. It is typically in the higher concentrations. And because of that, is our ability to produce it under our existing guidelines can be a little difficult sometimes, because it is we currently have a 10 milligram cap per dose. We do not have a cap on the number of doses a patient may take per day. So, instead of a dose that is 100 milligrams, we may recommend you take 10 milligrams every 10 minutes so that you can achieve your goals of therapy. We have recently had an increase in RSO from actually one of our competitors in the market. Nira currently has 3 or 4 different RSOs on the market. We typically have some. I believe we're a little low on inventory at the moment. But a lot of people find RSO or Rick Simpson oil to be effective in some treatments. There's not enough study of it, in my opinion, but that's where we are in this industry at the moment. We're in the infancy, and and it's been around a long time, and if you go to Europe and read studies, you can actually get real studies, but you're not going to find a whole lot in the U.S. right now, simply because of the federal issues.
Yeah, great. I have a lot of mixed feelings about RSO. You can probably tell that in just the way I phrased the question. I think there's a lot of subjective information about RSO, right? And as a clinician, that's not enough for me. Additionally, I think what is really important for people to understand is that your endocannabinoid system is a system of receptors. A very crude analysis I give my patients is, imagine you had an empty glass and you filled that glass with water, right? But you have more water, so you keep pouring. That's how I relate using concentrates sometimes to my patients, because you're saturating the receptors, right? Now, over time, what happens is that now you have to always saturate your receptors to get the same effect, okay? And then over more time, the duration of effect shortens. So now you're chasing it. The difference between adult use cannabis, and you can use that however you want to, I don't care, it's your body, and medical cannabis is the goal is to use the least amount of product to achieve the balance you're looking for. For some people, RSO is more effective because they need that level of pain control, or they need that way of dispensing something. Like in our state, some people just use things to make concentrates to make product, right? That's more tolerable. Sure, because this stuff is all super overpriced, so yeah, do what works for you. But medically, I think that a lot of the narrative around RSO is just that. And so that's kind of where I land on that product.
Thanks so much. We have some online questions we are taking a look at right now. RBA Cannabis Company asks, what is the daily maximum consumption of CBD in research, you believe? They go on to share where their concern comes from. It's on hemp products in Virginia that are limited to a 1:25 ratio. Can help 1 part THC, 25 parts CBD. Going to say this ratio has a lot of Virginians consuming hundreds of milligrams a day. There certainly should be awareness given to the community on these high ratios. So again, the question really is, what are your thoughts on consuming high quantities of CBD every day, and do you think, based on research, that there is a limit?
Well, I mean, I'll keep my answer very brief and let Michael, the pharmacist, talk about this more. But I didn't vote for that. I was in the legislature when that was proposed and passed into law. I think that is wrong. Because as I explained, when you have a Tylenol, you can have a Tylenol that's 325, or you can have a Tylenol that's 1,000 milligrams. And I definitely explained that, if you're going to do that, you're still going to have people with 10, 20 milligrams of THC, and then the equivalent of CBD. And that's just crazy. And if you're taking any of these products, they probably burn the crap out of your mouth if you're taking them as edibles, because they're just absolutely horrible when they get to be that high of CBD. But generally, when you dose CBD, you do it relative to milligrams per kilogram body weight. So, Michael, you might want to expound on that some more, but I think I never liked that law. I don't think it's based in medicine. I think it's based in, political influence of the cash that was behind companies that wanted high CBD. Can you tell them about politics anymore? I'm not like.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. There's been a lot of interesting solutions that vendors have used to try to overcome that. We've seen everything from actually adding the CBD to the product, but most often what we actually see is they're selling a THC product, and then they hand you a baggie of CBD isolate that is 25 times the amount of THC in the other product.
Oh, well, that's news to me, because I've just seen the 1,500 milligram gummies of CBD, which are
no, it's what we're seeing more of in the actual market is, here's your THC product. You can have 100 milligrams, so now you're going to have 2,500 milligrams of CBD, and here's your plastic baggie of it, and you can deposit it by the front door if you'd like.
Wild.
So in practice, that's what we're actually seeing. So my thoughts are, I've not seen a whole lot of consumers truly consuming the 1 to 25 ratio.
Oh, well, there's a big company down there in Southwest Virginia that's selling that in gummy form.
Okay.
I won't call that out, but I know this for
We'll
a fact.
connect later.
I ordered it to see what it was about, and it's just gross.
Yeah, most of the products are, as like Dr. Peace has done in her investigations, the #1 item in products in the illicit market,
Feces, right?
fecal matter.
Yeah, that's what it tasted like. Yep, I told him that. It's pretty bad.
I don't agree with using the extreme high dose of CBD,
Right.
but that is
It wasn't made in science. It was made in something else.
legislature. Yeah,
Yeah.
It was made trying to keep illicit product off the street.
I'm going to be, this is JM, and I'm going to be far less diplomatic than either of you and tell you exactly why there's a 1 to 25 ratio. So there's an out-of-state company that makes a product that is a 1 to 25 product. And
It's
this,
also a child's book, right?
sorry?
It's also a child's book.
Sure is.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. And they did not like the effort by the legislature at that time to close this sort of perceived hemp loophole. And the legislature was moving forward with their plan to do so. And this company wrote a check to the then governor, not our current governor, but when we had that, to ensure that they were able to still mail their product into Virginia, their product that's a 1 to 25 ratio. Now, the 25 was irrelevant to them, but they're going to sell this product because it had 300 plus milligrams of THC in it. So you're 100% right that it is based on politics, and most importantly for everyone who's annoyed by this, know that it is an out-of-state company that has nothing to do with Virginia.
Yep.
That made sure that made its way into the substitute bill from the Young
And
administration.
the people that explain that explicitly in session in many formats were basically told, you're getting some economic benefit from this, that's why you're wrong, which was just a straight up lie. So there's lots and lots of consternation about that particular piece of legislation that passed.
And there is significant research out there regarding the potential for liver toxicity from CBD and elevates liver enzymes. And there's also a recent clinical trial that NORML just reported on that, for those of you who might be concerned about this, the data from this clinical trial does say that short-term use of CBD is not putting you at risk for liver injury.
No, but again, it should be dosed by body weight. That is what the science says.
What?
Right.
We wrote a check?
Right.
Okay, we're gonna move on to some questions. Ellie has a question. This is great. Ellie asks.
Ellie, the advocate of the year.
Ellie
Hey.
Tucker, Virginia NORML's advocate of the year, and here asking the questions, of course. Ellie would like to know, is RSO appropriate for precancerous moles?
Completely new idea to me.
In any research, I wouldn't go in that direction probably, but I'd have to know a lot more about what's going on with your nephew.
The one thing that I would think is using it topically is going to be no danger, but I also don't think it would be any benefit.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. And I think we have another question that I know will be near and dear to both of your hearts.
Oh no.
Garrett says, I'm curious about your thoughts about Virginia dispensaries and the quality of the product for the price.
I feel like we're meeting high high quality standards. We are submitting every batch for testing. We can show you exactly what's there. We have, at this stage of the market, we're still in the infancy, really, and there's a lot of costs that have gone into it. I know just within the last couple of years, our company has spent over 50 million, and it takes a long time to recover.
Yeah, here's what I'll say about it. Over the 5 years, what we have seen are more products and a reducing cost overall, generally speaking. That being said, I will say that there are dispensaries in areas of Virginia that seem to be conscientious about pricing, reduce pricing as they can. And there are dispensaries in Virginia that gouge the hell out of the consumer. And you would think it would relate to our general economic environment, meaning like Northern Virginia is more expensive than other parts. It is not related to geographic interests. So cannabis in general, yes, it's very expensive, but over the 5 years, we've definitely seen product expansion. We've seen, especially I would say in the edibles, we've gone from 10 products to probably closer to 40 or 50, I don't know. I think Michael just happens to represent one of the dispensaries that I think has the strongest focus on medical-based products. Could the prices be less? Probably, and I imagine they will become a little more reduced when there's a broader market to sort of throw revenue back into what they have created. But it's a business, right? And so we're in America, and people are going to make money off of the consumer in whatever way they can, and still keep the consumer coming back. So it's a balance. But I do think in the last 5 years it's gotten better.
And the one thing we've been utilizing is tiered pricing. There are value lines, there's everyday lines, and there's premium. And obviously, if you want premium, it's a higher cost because it's a higher cost to produce. Like our rhythm line is 100% hand trimmed for flower. So you look at those, it takes a lot more man hours to do that than it does a popcorn that goes through a automated system.
But I'll use one of the original products as an example, the tangerine edibles, which were a 2-to-1, kind of that's sort of in the original market scale. They were $42. They were kind of $42 everywhere. A lot of times, you go Southwest, they're $24, right? But you're in Richmond, they're still $40.
We deliver to Richmond once a week.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, so it really, that piece of it is perplexing to me. But it's definitely something I notice because I see patients from all over the state.
And that's one reason we started the Richmond delivery. We would be in Richmond and talking to people, and they would be like, your product is this much at this location. And it's like, well, why aren't we just bringing our own product? So we started doing that. So every Wednesday we deliver to specific zip codes in the Richmond area.
They appreciate it. I know my Tidewater patients would appreciate it, as well as my Region 1 patients who don't have anybody. I think Tamara's got a question here.
I have a question. This is Tamara Netzel. Dr. Adams is my cannabis doctor, and I look forward to getting your book.
Thank you.
But I do have a question. I have multiple sclerosis, and I also have an immunodeficiency. I'd like to know what you know about how cannabinoids affect the immune system. That's my question.
Yeah. So cannabinoids can have a really positive effect, obviously, on the immune system. The one thing that I will say, as a differentiator, so on the rare occasion, I actually recommend concentrates to some people, very rarely, but I do. Concentrates, especially for the purposes of making edibles, I think can be really important. My one issue with that I like patients to be aware of is if you're immunocompromised, right? Particularly if you are getting treatment and you are really truly like neutropenic or whatever, really truly immunocompromised, I very much don't recommend that you smoke flower. And the reason for that is because, not that there's anything wrong with the dispensary issued flower, right? But it's still a plant, and plants are amenable to things like mold depending on the environment. And if you get something like aspergillus, right, that is a very serious lung fungal infection that is very hard to treat. And so I try to think about, like, this is why it's so important that it's like a very specific patient with very specific criteria, and what do you know about them, so that you can really say, okay, I mean, at the end of the day, you get to decide what you want to do. But there are things that can be helpful and things that potentially might not be helpful because of X, Y, or Z. So I think, there's certainly research that talks about the anti-inflammatory properties of THC and CBD, and even some of the other cannabinoids that we're looking at. And so, but one of the things I hate to draw conclusions about is like, it's good for X, an entire category, because patients are so unique. And this is one of the big fails in medicine, right? Is that we sort of just throw prescriptions, right? Like that, this is for you, and it's also for you, you, and you, and you like have totally different metabolisms and bodies. And this is, again, like my practice of cannabis medicine is just a gateway to really talk about your health, right? Like that's what I really like. And so, what I would have to see is like, what's going on? What are your meds? What are your symptoms? And kind of like, okay, well, let's try this. And does this work for you? And oh, it's not for exact. So maybe CBD works a little bit, and then, oh no, CBD is much better. So, but that's unique to you, right? I'm just making stuff up, but I'm just saying this is what's so important, and this is the beauty of cannabis medicine. I think it's so special. We don't practice medicine like that generally.
Thank you. I just want to say that I agree with you, and I feel like it's what is so fascinating to me with cannabis is that the personal choice, and that you really truly can work with your doctor
if they want to learn about it.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Anthony Mijares. Hello, my name is Anthony Mijares. I appreciate y'all both being here and educating us. My question is, what conditions do you see cannabis being most effective for, and where do you see the limitations?
Well, for me, I can just speak to what I see in my practice, and it gives me sort of a narrative around it. I see a lot of patients with anxiety, a lot of patients with pain, a lot of patients with issues with sleep. I'll just take those as the big three. But here's the thing about cannabis, which is great. When it works for people, it means less ibuprofen, less Celebrex, less opioids, less sleep medications, less Benadryl, and these are all medicines that have horrific side effects. I'm also seeing a lot of people use it as a way to drink less. And what I'm seeing is that, and alcohol is far more toxic than cannabis, just light years more toxic, right? We have legal cigarettes, we have legal alcohol, and yet cannabis somehow is this demon, which is really based in racism and a long history of other garbage, right? Cannabis is very amazing. I have patients who are off of opioids, are off of Vyvanse, right? Like, so, because cannabis can work differently. Like a sativa, maybe that winds people up sometimes, but for some of my patients with like ADHD, it gives them more focus. I mean, this is the reason why if you tailor it, it's a much less toxic, like, everybody's walking around on speed because they have ADHD, but if we were saying everybody's walking around cocaine, that would horrify people, right? So it's kind of like insane the way that we treat this. So I've got people on less, sleeping medicines with like things like Lunesta. I mean, people driving around the block and eating their way through the refrigerator and doing crazy. I mean, that's not what cannabis does. Either you're going to sleep or you're not. I mean, it's not like sometimes people stay up and eat too much, and I tell them, remember that you ate dinner, number one, and number two, there are things that you could do to sort of mitigate some of that. But go to sleep, that would help, right? So I mean, it's cannabis is such an excellent medication there are many, many symptoms, but what I see are mood disorders, sleeping issues, and pain as the top three, however you want to characterize that. And it definitely helps. It's definitely, I wish I, could explain to people how much it's reduced the consumption of medications, pharmaceuticals, and, recreational drugs in a way that's such a safer, place for people to land.
And I'm not seeing patients on a regular basis any longer, but when I'm talking to patients, I do find that anxiety is typically number one. Sleep and pain are the big three that we see. And we literally had people that, like day 2 that we were open, we had a lady call back, and she had backed out of her driveway, and she had not been able to turn her head in like 15 years. And so she was used to just using her backup camera.
Yeah.
And literally one day of treatment, and she turned her head before she even realized it. So those sorts of case by case basis, you see effectiveness. It's a matter of the effect is maybe different for every person.
Yeah, and a big shout out again to, I tell you guys this all the time, but the Dharma muscle rub, although a lot of people want that old version, but the Dharma muscle rub is such an amazing medicine because many patients I have, they use that and they don't use anything else for pain. And I think that's pretty phenomenal to use a topical and that be your primary pain control. It's just amazing. Like this plant is amazing. I know we're going to wrap up, and I just wanted to say, I know that reading about cannabis can be boring, but I'd really like you to buy my book for somebody that would benefit from the information, because I really do spend a lot of time loving and caring about my patients, and I wrote it in that space and with that heart, and I think it would be helpful. So if it's something you want to consider, I'd be honored for you to do that.
And just for your information, we now have brought Muscle Rub back in a larger format jar, not a roller ball. So it is available now.
Yay!
We listen to you.
Great. Wonderful.
Oh, and it is double the size it used to be.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you so much to Dr. Adams and to Michael Johnson for joining us for the Ask a Practitioner panel. Friends, stay tuned to wherever you're watching, and we'll be back in a little bit with more content from day 2 of the 2026 Virginia Cannabis Conference.
Thanks, JM.
Thanks, Michael.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Dawn.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay? Because I have no audio of you. Nope. But as long as I can hear you. Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, first of all, so sorry I'm not there in person. This has been a fantastic conference, and thanks to JM and all of their supporters and the volunteers who have made this year's conference such a great conference. I'm happy to be presenting to you data. A lot of the data is fresh out of my research lab, and some of it you're the very first ones to be seeing some of it, and so I love being able to present here because I also get to pull together lots of threads of different stories that we tell about the research in my lab, right? And so we present to lots of different kinds of audiences, and every audience is different, is interested in a sort of a different theme. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the bigger arc of my research project. And so before I get started, though, I do have to make sure I am very clear about this. I am on the board of the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority. I'm very happy and thrilled to be serving the Commonwealth by serving on that board. However, I am in no way, shape, or form representing the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority today. This is all data that has been funded by the National Institute of Justice and the Virginia Foundation for Healthy Youth, and is my absolute independent research agenda that has nothing to do with the Cannabis Control Authority. So I also need to say that because I am funded by NIJ and the foundation, they love for me to say that opinions are mine. And some of that is because I have fairly strong opinions about some things. And of course, we have received absolutely no funding outside of the National Institute of Justice and the Virginia Foundation for Healthy Youth. So with all of that said, I do want to say, like, there are definitely a lot of people in the cannabis and hemp spheres that are really concerned and maybe frustrated by, you know, some of the narrative that comes out of my research lab. And I have to say that, you know, really my chief concern has always been about consumer awareness, consumer education, and consumers being able to make informed decisions. And when there are loose regulations or no regulations in some cases in our history, then nefarious activity can happen, and most certainly consumers get hurt. So I do want to talk about I don't just work on cannabis products. I also do a lot of work in the tobacco industry and the nicotine industries. So and so some of that work that is currently ongoing in my research lab is where we talk about the nature of unregulated nicotine vapes, right? Where the Food and Drug Administration has authorized 39 products to be sold in the United States that are nicotine. And so what we monitor are the unregulated ones. We occasionally do secret shop the regulated ones, but for the most part, we focus on, depending on who you talk to, the 9,000 to 10,000 unregulated nicotine vapes that are in the country that are largely in the hands of children because of direct marketing that is particularly attractive to young people, which is very similar to some unregulated cannabis products in terms of they're brightly covered and have weird names. And so, you know, the other thing that the unregulated nicotine industry is doing is, in order to capture and retain young people, is that they make vaping a gaming platform. So we do a lot of exposing what's happening in the nicotine industry as well. And so while I'm talking about nicotine and vaping and the general health around there, like, I get a lot of hate mail about, oh, well, Dr. Peace is just trying to kill the industry. I'm not trying to kill the industry. I'm trying to let consumers be able to make informed decisions about what they are consuming. And if they're in the unregulated spaces, they are potentially buying products and consuming products that can cause adverse events. And so, while that's certainly, like, for this audience, you hear me talk mostly about cannabis, but the same thing happens in nicotine industry as well. And so, so when the lung injury epidemic happened just before COVID, the Centers for Disease Control and the Food and Drug Administration, really said, well, the reason why people were having the lung injury, and some people died, was because of vitamin E acetate in unregulated gray market THC products. And I'll be honest, at the time, I begged them to not say that. And I'm not saying vitamin E acetate couldn't be implicated. It was definitely in a lot of products and found in the deep lung tissue of people who had lung injury. But there are other chemicals that are in vapes. And they're in nicotine vapes and they're in cannabis vapes, where the Food and Drug Administration has lists of chemicals that are safe to eat. They're called generally recognized as safe GRAS. And that doesn't mean they're safe to inhale. And so whether we're chemically analyzing a nicotine vape or a cannabis vape, invariably we find chemicals that are irritants and toxins in lung tissue. And so, like what you see on this slide, vanillin and limonene are really common chemical ingredients in cannabis vapes. And they are known irritants and toxins in lung tissue. So again, I'm not saying that we should, necessarily, ban them or, or get rid of vaping altogether. I am saying that there are going to be people who get hurt and have an adverse event, and that consumers need to be able to make informed decisions. And if we're going to allow these chemicals in these products, we need to put restrictions on their concentrations, again, to protect our most vulnerable. And there are some states that are looking at how do you manage the vaping products in the cannabis industry. There's a lot of conversation around that. And the unfortunate thing right now is that there's a lot of confusion and not a lot of data. So, so my lab is helping to contribute to that. So, sorry, wrong way. All right. So one of the other things I did want to bring up, again, this is in the spirit of consumer awareness, and granted, all of this data really is about nicotine. But the problem is that there is practically no data that currently exists on cannabis vapes and what happens when people consume those long term. But we can make probably a dotted line from nicotine to cannabis in terms of some of the outcomes, right? So we know that vaping nicotine does change your DNA, causes DNA damage in the mouth and throat. We do know that the nicotine vapes, and we know that cannabis vapes as well, are notorious for having heavy metal contamination, either from the manufacturing process or from sitting in the vape on the shelf itself, or because it runs through a heat cycle and those coils are probably leaching heavy metals into the aerosol that's generated. So there was an interesting study that just came out a few months ago that said that the blood of people who vape has almost double the amount of chromium, a heavy metal, in it than smokers. So granted, again, this is nicotine, but again, I want people to be able to make informed decisions about what and how they consume cannabis, and at least be a little bit more cautious about what those decisions are. The last thing I thought was actually pretty interesting was that this is a study that was done at Virginia Commonwealth University by a colleague of mine, where they brought in people who in the 21 to 30-year range. Some vaped, some didn't vape. And they ran them through some cardiovascular exercises and learned that the people who vaped were biologically 13 years older than the people who did not vape. And so again, this was nicotine. Take from that what you will. But I do think that we have to be really thoughtful about the nature of vaping. So I say this all the time that, policy and regulations really do support education and quality assurance. And in that gap, then mythology and there's going to be quality assurance issues that arise. So one of the things that early on in our research that we started monitoring was when the cannabis industry first entered into the vape marketplace, was we watched the evolution. We watched how the cannabis industry was using the consumer and the marketplace as essentially their petri dish, their research design experiment to discover what was going to work in the marketplace or what was going to work in the products. So they were using the consumer as their experiment. So we knew that waxes and dabs had existed for a long time for THC. And then we saw them evolve into the vaping industry or the vaping marketplace. So in the early days of THC in a vape, we saw that the market was using polyethylene glycol and medium chain triglycerides. So PEG is, it's safe to eat PEG. PEG is in lots of food products. It gives food products body. It's in cough syrup, right? It's something that gives weight to a product in viscosity. Medium chain triglycerides is essentially coconut oil or palm oil. And so the reason why the cannabis industry was using these was that cannabinoids don't dissolve very well in water. And so they thought, well, we'll put it in something oily and use that as the body of the vape. And then that, of course, didn't work out very well. So we saw this evolution in the products themselves. So the numbers I want you to look at here, and I know this is super nerdy, but the numbers I want you to look at here are the 0.0065 milligrams per milliliter. So that's how much CBD, same thing holds true for THC, how much CBD was in those bottles. And so these were products where CBD was put into propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin, the carriers for nicotine in nicotine vapes. So that's not very highly concentrated. And so the reason is because cannabinoids are oily and PG and VG are watery. So essentially we have an oil and water situation that has arisen here. So we did for a while start seeing these products in the marketplace where they were just directly putting CBD into nicotine pods, and we saw these layers begin to emerge again because cannabinoids and PG and VG don't mix very well. So these layers develop, and in this situation, consumers actually have no idea how much of either of the drug it is that they're going to be getting in this situation because of the separation that exists right there. So then we saw MCTs. The industry began to use MCTs, the medium chain triglycerides. So remember previous, it was 0.006 milligrams per milliliters in propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin. Here we have oil. And so now we see the concentration of the cannabinoids go up, 532 milligrams, right? So we're watching the cannabis industry evolve in the consumer marketplace. And so, right, so not only is it not fair for consumers because they're not getting what they're paying for, but, there are definitely also manufacturing issues as well in this situation. So while we're monitoring that, right, and a lot of our focus really still is on nicotine, and we were always really concerned more because frankly, we always thought cannabis was low-hanging fruit for vapes and thought that it was inevitable. What we were really concerned about were other drugs, not delta-9 THC. So the synthetic cannabinoids like spice and K2, we call them panacas or the ubanacas. And so we're also monitoring things like cocaine and methamphetamine and people crushing up their Xanax and using hallucinogens and antipsychotics and putting all of those in their vapes. So originally we were really concerned about all of those issues, and we still are because we still see it as a problem. So nonetheless, we purchased these products and found a really dangerous synthetic cannabinoid, one of the spice products that was MDMB Fubinaca, right? MDMB Fubinaca had been known to kill thousands of people worldwide. And so it wasn't clear on the website what compound was actually in this product, right? And also really low quality in terms of how it's made. So while we're working on these kinds of questions and we're watching the cannabis industry unfold and evolve, of course, we have the hemp boom with the Agricultural Improvement Act or the Farm Bill 2018. And so when the hemp market crashed, then there was an effort then to, what do you do with all of this great CBD that's sitting around? And so it's easy to convert it to analogs. And so I also serve on the National Safety Council. And so one of the things I was very passionate about on the National Safety Council for legislators and policymakers, because I'll be honest, the hemp industry, and this, I find this wildly aggravating, is that there is no known pharmacology or toxicology about these compounds that get made, these THC analogs that are made, HHC, THCP, THCO, THC, XD, all of these, more than 200 compounds can be manufactured out of delta-9 THC or CBD. And so with nothing known about them, these are not hemp. And I hate the term hemp derived. They're synthetic or semi-synthetic because they come from something natural. You can split that hair all you want. The point is that we don't pharmacologically or toxicologically know anything about these compounds. And so, and of course, that's what is largely in our unregulated marketplace now. And so a lot of you already know this story, right? And so I continue to tell this story because it has come back around. And it's come back around in the last 6 months or so. And I'm going to show you that data. We thought that once the semi-synthetics like Delta 8 and Delta 10 and 6A10A and HHC and all those, we thought that once those emerged, we probably wouldn't see these guys much anymore at all. Well, wrong. They have made their way back into the marketplace. So I'm going to show you that data. But anyways, the story is that, somebody had reached out to us and said, hey, lady, I smoke a lot of weed, and this wasn't weed. This was somebody who was had purchased a CBD product because he had test anxiety. He was a graduate student, and he reached out to us after he said he had a really hard high from this, and so he sent us the product, and then we purchased directly from Diamond CBD 8 more products. And so you see, and we randomly chose them off the website. There was no way for us to cherry pick these things. We just randomly selected off the website. This company had, they quality test their products, and it's all completely natural, right? This is a theme. And so in 4 of the 9 products, we found 5-fluoro-ADB, which is one of the spice products that have been known to kill tens of thousands of people worldwide. And 1 product had dextromethorphan in it, which is the active ingredient in over-the-counter cough syrup. So we published that. And somebody from the Philadelphia Inquirer took it to the CEO of Diamond CBD at MJ BizCon. And he was, of course, really, really angry with us. And then he said, he went back and did a spot check of the product, of the batch that we purchased out of. There was no way he could have known where we purchased. There was no lot number on the products. And also I secret shop, so there was no way for him to know what batch I had purchased out of. So, but he does say, he's like, oh, well, there was melatonin in that and not CBD. Well, I'm sorry, that's still not CBD. That's still not the thing that you are advertising. And so this is one of the enduring problems in the unregulated industry, is that the package doesn't match what is actually in it, and it's lying to the consumer. So we've got to get serious about that. So what wound up happening was that every time the CEO said something about me, I said something about the product again, and so we landed in a lot of public media because of these. So if you watch Weed 5 is largely about my research lab. Chemical and Engineering News, Discover Magazine. My favorite is AARP. And I was just in Scope. So I'm very proud of that I was on Scope, that I'm in Scope right now. I'm going to show you why I'm in Scope in a little bit. So the unintended consequence of us being across all this media was that we started receiving hundreds of people across the nation telling us that they had had adverse events, and they started sending us their products. And so we would analyze them. And so one of the things that in the early days, right, it's all these synthetic cannabinoids that are the spice and the K2 products. And I'm sorry, I don't think my animation is working. So, nope, it's not working. So then we started getting in cases that were really high concentrated delta-9 THC or CBD products that were leading to adverse events. And these were people that are probably naive users. Like we had two ladies over the age of 70 who had significant adverse events that were horrifying and did last for days. And all we found in their products that they were taking for rheumatoid arthritis was really high concentrations of THC. And then we started getting in now, or the current wave of products that is really the semi-synthetic cannabinoids. So I talk about this scenario all the time, right? Because again, as a scientist, words matter, and we have to be really clear about what these are. The term hemp-derived gives it an air of safety, right? Because it's referring to a plant, but it goes through the plant goes through not just the extraction, but a major synthetic chemically derived process with all kinds of solvents involved in it. And so there are issues with contamination in the final products. And so in this scenario, you'll see that this was sold as 45 milligrams of Delta-8. And the person who consumed this had 4 to 5 hours of horrifying hallucinations, believe their legs had been chopped off. And that's a horror show for 4 to 5 hours. And this was somebody who was a regular cannabis user. So we wound up getting the product, and you'll see there, we found 631 milligrams of Delta-8, but the advertisement was 45. We have 631 of Delta-8, 204 of Delta-9, and 953 of CBD, milligrams of CBD. So, right, so to talk about why I don't like to call this hemp-derived, is that yes, the Delta-8 THC is naturally made by the plant. But let's assume that we have the best genetics of the plant. It is genetically tilted towards making Delta-8. It's still going to be made by the plant in trace amounts. And so if we assume that a plant can make as much as 1% of Delta-8, to make that single honey stick, you're going to need 14 pounds of plant material to make that single honey stick. So, right, so that's why we can say, well, that's just economically unfeasible. This Delta-8 was synthetically derived and did not come from the plant. So we have to be really clear about the words that we're using. So we started monitoring the unregulated marketplace. We are funded by the National Institute of Justice to do this. And so we actually have, we're not just in Virginia. We're just finishing up surveillance shopping in Washington, D.C. And I'm not going to tell you where our other surveillance shopping is, but we are surveillance shopping a couple of other states. And of course, we're getting products online. So in Virginia, because of the nature of the experimental design, we have Virginia split up into its 5 health districts, and we purchase products out of each of the 5 health districts. And we try to purchase from different kinds of shops. So we bring them into the lab. But while we're making the purchase, we check: is there age gating? Does the dude behind the counter actually give us pharmacological advice that they shouldn't be giving? Do they have to use an ATM in the corner? Like, is the product on display, or do they have to get it from, some room in the back? And then we bring it into the lab and we do an untargeted analysis. We do a quantitation. We find out how much of the drug is in the products. And then we also do microbiological testing. So we spend a lot of time on vape products, of course, but also edibles. And so we like to spend time on vape products because we think that this is an entry point for a lot of the products, right? Because, you can just take the wax that gets formed from that original synthesis and jam it into the chamber of a vape and then sell it, right? So you don't have to do a lot of manufacturing around that. So it might be a good test market for one of these compounds. We do spend a lot of time in vapes, but again, we're also checking on edibles as well. So sorry, I'm not getting animation here, but to make the point here, so we shopped in a public club, and we bought all kinds of products from here. And of course, some of the concern here is that the packages aren't labeled at all. Some of the products had handwriting on them. And then when we ran them through the microbiologicals, we found coliform, which is an indication of fecal contamination. We found bacteria and mold that came off of these products. And we're going to talk about the concentrations of THC in a couple of slides. In this shop, you'll see there behind the yellow box, I've got circled a hair. So we opened up a package of brownies, and this hair was sticking straight up out of that package. But our biggest concern here was that our secret shopper was forced to consume the vape before they left the shop. And the person who worked in the shop said, "Oh, we want to make sure that it works because you can't bring it back if it doesn't work." My chief concern as a forensic toxicologist is that, one, you just force somebody to consume a drug that is federally illegal. But two, that they also likely got into their car impaired in some capacity. That I find to be egregious. This is a membership club we purchased out of. None of the products have any kind of labeling on them. And when we ran through microbiologicals across the board, we found aerobic count, yeast, and mold. And so I know this is really small print. What I'm going to tell you is that for 12 of the 25 products, they had no label at all. But 2 of the products were only within 20% of the label. Now, that's to be expected. But 4 were within 50%. 6 of the products were more than 50% off of the label. That's problematic. And what you can see there, and what's in red, is that they were low. They were low. So the consumer is not getting what they're paying for, is probably the biggest problem here. But there's no truth in advertising here. So we purchased out of a vape shop, and just to give you an example, I've got lots of horror stories out of this shop, but for this one in particular, that says it contains less than 0.3% THC to be Farm Bill compliant. We actually found that it was 30% Delta-8 THC. And not only was it 30% Delta-8 THC, we found Delta-8, Delta-9, 6A10A, HHC, and we also found the analog that indicates to us, which is this 4,8 iso THC. that indicates to us that it is a synthetic production. So even if this was just Delta 9 THC and it had that 4.8 ISO, I would know that that Delta 9 was synthetically derived, not natural from the plant. So in this dispensary / head shop, the point I wanted to make out of this was that I think 3 years ago, we received an adverse event case of some young ladies who had purchased these products and come to Richmond for a concert. And they all shared the same pre-roll. And one of the young ladies had a significant medical event that the lead singer of the concert stopped the concert so that she could get medical attention. And so this product came out of that shop. And so you can see here, not only was the label not right, it was full of yeast, mold, and bacteria, and was the same for the products that we purchased from them. And so you can see here, the red numbers indicate that it is way off the label, as much as minus 70%. So also problematic for the consumer. This is a bakery. I did want to point out to here, right? So that they say that they are legal, even though they're selling THC, they are compliant with code, with legislation, by saying that their products are less than 0.3% THC. And so because, you know, let's say a brownie or a cookie weighs a lot, it can have a lot of THC in it as long as it's under 0.3%. And then they also bring up the 25 to 1, or you're going to see me call it the 1 to 25 ratio of THC to CBD. They also say that every product has to be sent off to the state to be tested. I don't know who they're sending that to be tested, to be honest. But nonetheless, they also say that they manufacture their products under good manufacturing procedures. And in their products, we found a lot of yeast, mold, bacteria, and coliform. Again, an indicator of fecal contamination. And so when you take a look at the ratio, right? So it's a 1 to 25 ratio of THC to CBD is what's supposed to be in their products. Sorry, this didn't come over very well in this program, but you'll see there that the first product is 1 to 17. The second product is 1 to 0.03. The third product is 1 to 24, so it's close to being compliant with Virginia code. The next one is 1 to 10, 1 to 15, 1 to 16, 1 to 13, 1 to 22. So most of the products are not compliant with Virginia code, actually. So my lab does spend a lot of time, looking at these synthetic cannabinoids and what they actually are, developing the methods. Every time we find a new one, we have to redevelop our method and validate it. And so this is essentially showing that it doesn't matter what the label says. So in this situation, right, the front of the box says that it's Delta 8. The back of the box says that it is Delta 8 THCO acetate. That is a completely different cannabinoid with different pharmacology that we can tell. There's a little bit of data that demonstrates that it can be 3 to 5 to 7 times more potent than Delta 9. Again, we still need to do that work. Nonetheless, it's a different compound. The certificate of analysis says something entirely different, and then we found something different in the product itself. This is a product that says that it's Delta 8 and THCP, and they said, oh, well, we can't, there's no lab that actually analyzes for THCP. So quality assurance testing labs don't have these expanded panels of all these synthetic cannabinoids. And so you'll see there, they say, oh, it's expensive equipment and it's more advanced testing staff. And while that's true in some regards, it's also not their job to test for all of these other compounds. And so we actually found Delta 8, THCP, Delta 9. This is problematic. All right, so this is a case out of this past year. You'll see here that this was a kid, and he was vaping. This is a case we received in May. And you'll see here the mother said he would cry, was hypervigilant, and then catatonic. And that he cycled like this multiple times every single day. And so they say that they are Farm Bill compliant, to be less than 0.3% THC. We found 3% THC, but we believe the culprit for the adverse event was THCP that's in this product. This is a case where a woman was experiencing back pain. She was taking CBD. And so her pain was increasing. So she started taking more of it. And then as she was taking more of it, she started feeling like she was off and hallucinating. So she sent it to us, and we found MDMB EN 4EN Panaka, a spice product. And so we actually are seeing the spice K2 products having a major resurgence in the United States now, unfortunately. And so one of the concerns that I do have about these kinds of products, and frankly, our lack of education around impairment and consuming cannabis, is that this is a study that we did where we asked people what they were vaping, what they put into their vapes, which was very interesting, but also the context in which you vape. And so a significant number of the people who took our survey said that they vaped cannabinoids while they drove. And so I have asked for permission to start showing videos of people who were pulled over for DUIs, who were clearly on something like this, but also have had the analytical work done on blood or urine to demonstrate that they were vaping these kinds of products while they were driving. And so, causing serious danger, not only to themselves, but to everybody else on the roadway, and also pedestrians, because pedestrian deaths are up as well. I do want to take a pause, since I know we have military that's watching. We monitor products that are marketed to the military and first responders. These are some of the products that we've purchased, because they say you will pass a drug test if you consume these products, because they're just CBD. So when we analyzed for them, everything is in purple, shows that it actually had Delta 9 THC in it. And if you take more than, 2 tablets, you're likely to test positive in a urine drug test. The only product that we had that did not have Delta 9 THC in it was Rescue One, this broad spectrum oil, but it still didn't have as much CBD in it as what it advertised that it did. And you'll see down here that Hemp Bomb says that it was THC free. When it's got 12 milligrams per gummy, that's not THC free. This is actually fairly recent. These are products that I know, because I have colleagues and friends who work for the Department of Defense, that they know that these products are being actively marketed to the military. So you'll see there where how they do that and the language that they're using. So this is the data that they actually showed, is that the products that are being actively advertised to the military claim that they're Blue Lotus or Valerian are full of the spicing K2 compounds. And so they are seeing pretty significant, the Department of Defense is seeing pretty significant and widespread adverse events from soldiers who are taking these products. And so if you, let me see if I can go back. So this product down here, the Bummy Juice, so they actually got this guy. So this is from the U.S. State Attorney's Office. So this is a Houston man that was found putting this MDMB 4EN Panaka into the vape juices. So they were able to arrest him. But nonetheless, hundreds of soldiers and consumers have been hurt because of these products. I'm going to talk really quickly about the Confiscated Vapes project that we have across the Commonwealth. Again, it's split into the 5 health districts. And so we work with schools. They send us the vapes that they have confiscated off of a child or they have found on the premises someplace. And what we see here, so we started this project in 2019, and by the fall of 2023, the average about 15% of the vapes are some kind of cannabinoid. And so my concern, what we're going to see in the data, is that kids have access in the unregulated marketplace to these products. down here, we're showing that we actually had, we collected three products off of elementary school kids, and one of them was a cannabinoid product. And so all of the compounds that we have found that were cannabinoids were these semi-synthetic cannabinoids, delta 8, 6A10A, THCP, HHC. And so what you see up here is that a significant number of the kids are able to walk into a shop and buy these products themselves. So again, this is the unregulated cannabis marketplace. This is the white one. That's middle right is the one that came off of an elementary school kid. The other issue with these products is that the cannabinoid products, like none of those, and we featured these, none of these products have a pot leaf on them, have zero indication that it's a cannabis product. And so when a kid has an adverse event in school and they pull one of these products off of them, then it has now become an imperative, in my opinion, that we have to find out what actually caused the adverse event. So these are some of the compounds that we have found in these products. This is how I landed in scope. One of the questions that I had, right, because these vapes come off of kids, they're gross. And we also know that they're confiscating some out of bathrooms where kids hide them in the toilet paper dispenser, behind the toilet, in the toilet, in the ceiling panels above the toilet. And so I'm thinking they're disgusting. So I had my students start a course. We found yeast, mold, bacteria, and coliform. Not surprising. Then my question became, well, they're living species, they're cells, they're living, so surely they're not light enough to actually wind up in the aerosol. They are. So not only is it on the device, but it's also in the aerosol. And, you know, so some of the issues for these kids who are reporting to the nurses' stations, you know, that maybe have cramps or nausea and vomiting or fever or raspiness, could be because they're inhaling yeast, mold, coliform. You know, it's a stretch. Well, actually, I don't think it's much of a stretch, frankly. But we have to be really thoughtful about what these effects are that kids are having in the schools. So to put a bow on this, you know, we know there's a term called greening out, and that is that maybe consumers who are experienced we'll call it greening out, and they're just like, oh, rest it off, it'll sleep off. But people who are naive or not experienced cannabis users, this is terrifying for them, right? Particularly if the anxiety or the panic or the rapid heart rate and the confusion and hallucinations that can precipitate for some of these patients. So we have to be really, really thoughtful. You know, Dr. Adams said earlier that, you know, the dose is important, that we should be dosing based on weight, based on an individual's health, right? So there's lots of parameters that come into thinking about how much cannabis somebody should be using. So we do know that when there's an adverse event, healthcare responders don't know what it was to. We have to stop attributing all of these adverse events to cannabis. We have to stop attributing it to Delta 9. Or to CBD. And so as somebody who thinks a lot about this, I think that we need to, particularly for the sake of legalization, we have to know what the adverse events can be attributed to, so that I'm in the space of, if you're not measuring it, you cannot manage it. And so I think we all have to work together, whether it's law enforcement, the court systems and drug courts, and healthcare providers, teachers. I think we have to have, the industry is passionate about this. The industry has to be a part of the solution. I tell this to my colleagues who are in law enforcement and the court systems and healthcare providers. We have to involve the cannabis industry, who has a major stake in making sure that, you know, that are patient first, that are consumer first. And then I think we have to get the media to care about these stories, because I don't know how to reach the consumer, to get them to appreciate that shopping in the unregulated marketplace can be dangerous for them. So on that note, I think there's probably some slides. Thanks to JM, thanks to Virginia NORML. And thanks to you for hanging out with me. All right, so, oh great, she stopped it. Or they stopped it. Are we, am I still with you?
Hi, you are. Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
I can hear you.
I love that for us. Michelle, there are a few questions. Let's take a look at those and you can answer those before we get into our next talk.
Okay.
Ooh, I see this one, and I think this is a question you and I are going to love together. I think it's been from the first panel, but it's relevant to this as well. So let's show Paul's question. And Paul asks, will the rescheduling of cannabis speed up how fast it can be used in medical research in the U.S.? And I know that you know, and anyone who watches Live with NORML knows how, I'll just say irritated we are by the media's perception that somehow rescheduling allows us to finally do research on cannabis in the U.S. Of course, the U.S. is now the leader in cannabis research. There are tens of thousands, upward of 50,000 entries on PubMed.gov, the nation's repository for peer-reviewed scientific literature that reference cannabis or one of its constituents. There are hundreds of gold standard, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trials for cannabis done in the U.S. Yet we have this narrative that finally we're going to be able to do research, and really there's one thing that rescheduling would do, and you know what that is.
So when I think the challenge, it's an easy excuse to not do more research. I think is because it's Schedule 1. Making it Schedule 3, I think, frankly, isn't going to really move the pen for researchers, right? Because it's still on the schedule, which means that there are going to be hoops that you have to jump through because it remains on the schedule. So there are ways that we can conduct research. The challenge is getting it funded, right? So at the federal level, there has been very few research dollars that have been provided for these gold standard research projects, these clinical studies. And I know that the National Institutes of Health, they just stood up a center that is going to begin crafting sort of guardrails for conducting clinical research. So hopefully we're going to see more of that in the future. There are a few states who's used tax revenue from their adult use retail marketplace to actually fund significant retail research projects that have been, I think, pivotal in my world to actually understand, cannabis. But there's a lot of work to be done, and I don't think rescheduling it is actually going to accelerate anything. It's the loopholes the requirements are still going to exist because it's scheduled.
Right. So instead of you having to get a Schedule 1 license, you would only have to get a Schedule 3 license.
Yes, correct.
Exactly. That's the reduction of barrier to research that really is impacted by rescheduling, and it's limited to that. It does not open up research. It just changes the schedule license type. All of the restrictions on federal research related to marijuana predate marijuana even being added to the Controlled Substances Act at the federal level, and are specific to marijuana. They are not specific to its Schedule 1 status. So I'm so glad that Paul asked that question, even though I'm certain he knows the answer, just so that we can have this conversation.
It's important for people to understand, full stop, what the rescheduling is really going to do versus not.
For sure. Ian, you had a question, and if you want to hand it to me, I can read it, or if you just want to ask it, I might have to repeat it for you, but
Ian here, I just had a question for Dr. Peace. I was just wondering, given the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority is like a small and fairly new institution, I would want to hear your thoughts on the role of certain approved private testing companies essentially being like deputized by the control authority to like pass their tests on product concentrations, contaminants, and cannabinoid terpene spectrum to like an online database that might be possibly physician monitored, and then where the patients can also provide possible testimonials and experiences with those products, sort of like a general database of like a clinical trial. So if there's a product that basically has issues or contaminants, not only will that be posted to the database, but a patient can also come in and say, hey, I also had a bad experience with this. Or if everything is confirmed properly and the tests confirm what's on the packaging and what have you, then another registered patient could come along and say, hey, I use this for my back pain, or I use this for da-da-da-da, to also kind of come in and confirm it, since clinical trials are, very scarce nowadays.
So there are a couple of layers there. The first one is that in a regulated marketplace that requires quality assurance testing for all of those products, if any of the products fail that quality assurance testing, hopefully there's a recall of those products so that they come out of the consumer's hands, right? Just like if a crib, causes injury to a baby, there's, it's on the news and it's in social media that says, take it back to, the big box store for your money back, right? So to not consume it, right? Or whether it's tainted lettuce. So, hopefully, in the regulated marketplace, right? This is why I push for there has to be an adult use retail marketplace to hopefully minimize, if not stop, the unregulated marketplace, is so that there are uncontaminated products for consumers. I think the challenge with, like you're asking about, consumers, like giving a rating system for their products, I think that's tough, right? Because you have no idea how much product that person is consuming. You have no idea what their dose is. You have no idea what their physical health is, what their mental health is. And so getting a review from any given person, I think is bad advice, frankly, right? Because you're not that body. So, I think when people say, like that was a really good joint, sure, but I don't think, particularly if people are going to be using it for medical benefit, I don't think that they should be sharing that information with how that product worked, because, like we learned from the previous session, the effects can be so different person to person. And we can't call that research. We just can't, because there's nothing blinded and you have no idea what the dose is that somebody's taking. So I think, one, we have to have a regulated marketplace for consumer protection so that there's access to safe products that's not contaminated, and that there's a way to get those off the shelves if they are, or not send them out if they are. And if somebody else wants to stand up a database of consumer reviews, I don't, frankly, I'm not speaking for the CCA, not speaking for them, but I don't think that should be something that the CCA should take on.
All right, we have one last question before we say goodbye to you and slide into our final discussion of the conference. And this is great for both of us, because the first part is for me and the second part is for you. Really, the whole thing's for both of us.
I love that for us.
First of all, T-Pain, I love your name. Second, let's go ahead and show this question. So T-Pain says, how are we going to change the narrative that the increase in ER visits and experiences of psychosis are most likely not related to the plant, but to synthetic/semi-synthetics also? Do you agree that synthetics are the culprit? So T-Pain, I'm glad you asked this question because I can tell you what we've done, at least in Virginia. And so we had some reports come out from Poison Control that calls to poison control had skyrocketed. And they were trying to tie this to, well, Virginia changed marijuana laws, and that's why calls to poison control skyrocketed. Maybe it is, because maybe now what we know from other states is when people aren't afraid of being arrested and they have a healthcare concern, then they will seek healthcare instead of hiding so they don't go to jail. So yes, we do know that calls to veterinarians and calls to poison control and visits to the ER increase when the risk of going to jail for doing so is eliminated. Second, to this very particular part about synthetics, we spoke with poison control after this original reporting by them came out and said, how do you know it's marijuana? You said calls skyrocketed for marijuana because marijuana laws changed. How do you know it's marijuana? Are you asking what they consumed? You should ask. You should, at the most basic level, you need to ask people what they're putting in their bodies, not making assumptions and then reporting it as fact. And they did. To their credit, they said, great. So they started asking. And I think they were using sort of catch-all language like Delta 8, right? But this is really not asking specifically about Delta 8 rather than is it a synthetic product? Is it an unregulated product? Lo and behold, you and I both know how that turned out.
Yeah, I think, I said this previously, is that, when you have adverse events coming through a healthcare system, it really does behoove us to find out what the nature of that adverse event is due to. And the unfortunate thing is right now, it is really impossible right now in a lot of ways to do that. So the first issue is that you need to get the product from the person who had the adverse event. And they either A, don't want to turn it over, B, used it all already, which might have led to the adverse event. And then you have to send it off for testing. So that brings the next layer of issue, is that there are not very many labs that has this full panel of all of these cannabinoids, semi-synthetic cannabinoids, that can do this testing. So that's the next layer of issue. And that's if you have the product. If you don't have the product and you have, blood or urine from the person, our challenge is that right now, we don't know what the biomarkers are of those compounds to be able to analyze in blood or urine. So what we know about Delta 9 THC is that it gets metabolized very quickly, turns into a metabolite. So when we look for Delta 9 THC, we don't look for the parent, we look for a metabolite, Delta 9 carboxy. So with all of these other compounds, we have no idea what those metabolites are. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the reasons why the National Institute of Justice is funding me right now, is because we're chasing those. We're trying to figure out what they are without giving them to a mouse or a human. So right now we're just churning. We have literally human liver, the cells from a human liver, and we are processing these drugs through the cells of a human liver to try to generate these biomarkers that we can say, oh, if somebody took HHC, this is the metabolite you need to look for. And so nobody's doing that yet in a routine basis. And so that's our other challenge in terms of really attributing these adverse event cases. So we have layers of challenges in front of us still.
We do, but I hope T-Pain that answered your question, and I hope you're at least pleased to hear that we take these issues seriously, and in fact, in Virginia, we are taking meaningful steps to address them. Oh yes, T-Pain says awesome. Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Peace, thank you so much for joining us and during Snowmageddon and delivering your highly anticipated discussion.
Thank you for having me. Y'all stay warm and get home safely.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, we are ready for the final talk here at the 2026 Virginia Cannabis Conference. And even if I hadn't turned around to face the audience, I can see that there's a lot more people in the live stream. There's a lot more people in the room. Everyone who's left here at the conference who's snowed in with us. Thanks for joining. I'm going to invite my colleagues, my friends, Sheba and Nigist. Great, we're all here. Can we hear you? Unmute yourselves. I unmute.
Hey, y'all.
Hey.
All right, I'm here.
All right, I'm making sure that our audio is good. At least two of us are in the same state, so that's good. Okay, friends. This is different than how we normally do this. So we sit in front of the screen behind me and we point to the bills. But we're gonna figure. That sound is weird. What is that?
Airport thingy.
Oh, that's right. I forgot, Sheba. I know it looks like you're in a very fancy house right now, but you're stuck in an airport, aren't you?
Yep, all good.
Do we want to do Sheba, do you want to do yours first? Do you want to talk about?
I got time, y'all. I'm stuck here until tonight.
Oh, nope. Bye. Sheba just left. So, funsies. Nope. Sheba's going to come back. Hey, good stuff. When I see you for real life, I will add you back, Sheba. Here we go. Welcome back.
Log in. I did the thing.
Let's have Sheba talk about your policy areas for session.
So where do we start?
So that we can, yeah, right. We'll talk about what your big wins already, and then with the constitutional amendments.
Oh, okay. So what's very important, we are in week 2 of session, and on day 1, the House passed the constitutional amendment for removing felony disenfranchisement from our Constitution after 124 years. Because of the redistricting constitutional amendment and the need to get that on the ballot in April, the House passed all 4 constitutional amendments on day 1. Senate had to wait 3 days because of their rules. They passed their version of the same constitutional amendments on Friday. So our constitutional amendment for the right to vote is going to the ballot November 3rd, 2026. And this is really important for everybody in the state, not just people who are disenfranchised, but there is a new base of voters to the tune of about 230,000 Virginians who will be able to vote on the policies that we care about. Many of those have been impacted by the failed prohibition, the failed war on drugs. They will now have a voice in our democratic process. So November 3rd, we're going to need everybody to show up and vote yes for our constitutional amendments. And that was just day 1, y'all. So huge win. It's something I've been working on for over a decade, and others have been working on for way longer, but that is critical to getting the policies passed that make sure that we're able to legalize correctly, make sure that we're able to get people home who are still sitting in prisons under cannabis offenses. We got about 300 people who still remain incarcerated with cannabis offenses. We also have about, I don't know the number on the number of people who are on probation or parole, but there's quite a few people who are impacted by that policy. So the right to vote constitutional amendment is critical to making sure that we actually get things passed that like we need. I I got to pause on that because that was just a huge, like, emotional win. Like, we got notification in the middle of presenting about the bill on the Friday Power Hour. Senator Boysko texted me and said, "Hey, the vote is up." So that happened like right in the moment. Like, things were moving so fast, but there's more work. Like, there are more things to do. In the first 2 weeks of session, the House version of the cannabis resentencing bill has passed out of subcommittee. Henson's bill is HB 26, which addresses cannabis resentencing for individuals who still remain incarcerated. Senator Rouse also has his version of the bill, SB 62. But I want to highlight something really important that happened in the subcommittee hearing on Henson's bill. It took some back and forth. It took a lot of time. They passed it by for the day. They did an amendment to include young people who have cannabis offenses so that they are not criminalized. They are also included in making sure that they are able to clear their records and have things taken off of their records that are cannabis specific. So that was a huge thing because they were left out initially. And we have been advocating for years to make sure that young people are not criminalized in this system, but they are given treatment and education and support. So Senator Rouse's version will be up soon. It's not docketed yet, but it is the cognates to Henson's bill in the House. The House version has passed out of court subcommittee. It still has some ways to go to get to the floor and actually be approved. So we'll need people to show up and testify and speak to their legislators about their support of these bills. That is a huge thing. One of my Senator McDougal has a bill, SB 142, that gives the localities the ability to collect the costs from fines and fees for the illegal sale of hemp and tobacco products to young people under the age of 21. I don't typically agree with Senator McDougal all the time, but I do agree with this bill. Safety is one of the most important things, and especially making sure that our young people do not have access to these products who are underage. So that's a big bill that I have been following and supporting. Now, our lovely Senator D. Steph has SB 12, which is trying to reinstate issuing citations for cannabis for traffic offenses in the odor of marijuana, which we got rid of pretextual searches back in 2021, I believe. So I'll be opposing that bill. DeSteph always puts something forth that is ridiculous. Every single year, he's trying to reinstate pretextual searches. There are implications. There's a racial inequity. There are more black drivers, 3 times more black drivers stopped in the state of Virginia than white drivers. So there's a disparate impact. We're never going to support a bill that allows police to lie about the smell of marijuana because that's what's been happening. And I know this firsthand because I've been pulled and told, like, hey, I smell cannabis and I do not indulge. So, and that's been a thing that's been going on for years, but there's no way to prove it in court. And of course, the judge is going to take the benefit of doubt from the officer and not the person. If you don't have to prove it in court and you just say you smell it, then you're probably going to violate my constitutional rights, my right to fair searches or illegal searches. So that's a big thing. And I have to say the retail market is being set up. There's a bunch of hoopla. There are a bunch of different versions of our retail market framework being set up. There was a win on, was it Friday, y'all?
It
I can't keep
was.
up. But
a thousand years ago on Friday.
Yes. So it needs a lot of work. It needs a lot of work. Everybody has a say in it. Everybody is interested in having their hand out, and nobody is thinking about the people who have actually been harmed by the failed war on drugs. Nobody is thinking about the consumers that need somebody to put protections in place for the products that are being put out. Everybody is like, how can I make a dime or a dollar off of this? And nobody is thinking about the people who are at the center of this. And my job, my role, as being somebody who was kind of sort of on the Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Board, but Youngkin wouldn't allow our board to meet because he was responsible for appointing the chair of the board, is to make sure that the retail sales go to the right place. So we codified 30% of the revenue, but there will be an increase in this final version of the bill, but money will go to HBCUs and reentry organizations and recovery organizations and K through 12 education and different entities that really should benefit from the retail sales market. But the primary thing is the safety of consumers. The primary thing is making sure that we're not still criminalizing a certain subsection of Virginians for indulging or using, making sure that like product safety is paramount to this. So we'll keep working on that as it goes through the different chambers because it's important. Senator Rouse and Senator Aird, there's so many people who are working on this. Senator Lucas, Delegate Krizik, like they are trying to make sure that we get the best bill for Virginians and make sure that like this is really set up in a thoughtful way. I will not give my opinion on certain things, but that's where we are. And I guess finally, and this has nothing to do with cannabis specific, but pretty proud of it, so I'm gonna plug it anyway. Our second look bill is up again this year, and it's HB 853, which Delegate Cousins is championing, and SB 634, Senator Dees is championing in the House, and it addresses extreme sentencing. And what a lot of people don't think about in that is when we think about the traffic stops that happen, officers have been able to, for years, say, I smell marijuana, I need to search you, and it has led to other offenses. So while we don't see a cannabis offense, because typically if they don't find cannabis, they lie about the smell of marijuana, obviously you're not going to find it, it leads to incarceration based on a lie. And if there's no way to prove it in court, there have been so many people who have been caught up in that trap that, I co-authored a bill in 2019 or 2020 to address the extreme sentencing in Department of Corrections. We have a fight on our hands because Virginia Victims Assistance Network, Kate Hanger, the executive director, has hired a lobbyist to fight against the bill, even though we set a ton of survivors and victims in front of her and explained why we support this bill. And she cried her fake tears, and then she went behind our backs and decided that she would speak for all victims and survivors and say that they don't want the bill. They want a victim veto in it. And if you go back and look at the video or the testimony from January 31st, 2024, victims and survivors on both sides said they did not want a victim veto. So y'all will see me in the halls of the GA working on that, because this is something that I'm very passionate about. And if we're talking about cannabis and how everything intersects, there are people who are sitting in prison for a false allegation of a smell of cannabis, who got over sentenced, overcharged, over policed in their communities. And this is one resolve to address people who didn't have an appeal means or did not have the knowledge that they needed to have. And I'll stop there.
And Shiva, you mentioned something that triggered another thought. This is also where we're seeing people remanded on their original crime when they test positive for cannabis, and that's not recorded.
So actually it gets recorded as a technical violation, and you don't typically know why. So there's 69,000 people in the state of Virginia who are under community control, which means parole or probation in the moment. It can be anything from missing an appointment, arriving late to an appointment, not completing a class, not being able to afford fines and fees, dirty urine for cannabis. And let's be clear, parole officers use this thing and say, well, even though it's legal, we say you can't use it. No different than alcohol. They will put a clause in your terms and conditions and saying you can't utilize this. And if you test positive for alcohol or cannabis, they can violate you, which in turn means you can stay on probation longer or you can return to jail or prison. Many people have, kind of fallen victim to this. And even if you have a medical card, if you are on probation, they will give you a violation sometimes for utilizing cannabis. And to be clear, everything isn't recreational. There are people who have medical disorders. My mom was one. My mom had lung cancer before she passed, and cannabis was the the only thing that gave her an appetite. So, it's something to keep in mind. Like, everybody is not just saying I'm breaking the rules, I'm breaking the laws. Like, we also had a protection bill for parents who utilize cannabis to make sure that they were not being dinged in child custody cases or divorce cases or what have you for using cannabis. Like, this is a very important thing. There were employee protection bills to make sure that people who use were not going to be fired for using, not on the clock,
Right.
not on the clock, but in their, spare time, their out of work time, because it stays in your system for 30 days or what have you. They could actually lose their jobs based on their adult use, medical use. And there were bills to kind of address that too.
Right. Unfortunately, we were able to codify those employment protections, both for private and public employees. The only exemption is law enforcement, and essentially shipbuilders have some federal standards they adhere to. There's a state exclusion for LEO, though, at the request of a Republican senator. So if you're mad about that, friends, I can tell you who to be mad at. It's not us. But we do have the parental rights bill that was vetoed back this year. Delegate Clark has HB 942 again. It's the same as we've had for this is our third session doing this bill. I'm fairly third or fourth. I can't remember. It's at least three.
I think it's third.
Mm-hmm.
I think so.
And as you mentioned, it very appropriately captures the way in which we see this play out in a parental rights scenario, not related to people coming in and taking your kids from you, right? CPS, as we typically hear the claim. Not to say that that's not happening, but that's not the bulk of it. The bulk of it is what Sheba said. This is in custody type litigation where there's a divorce and someone's health records are subpoenaed, and then it's, well, you have a medical cannabis card, you're a terrible person, and you should never see your children. And this is happening for real in courts throughout Virginia. We hear about it constantly. And so I'm glad you brought up that legislation, because I'm looking forward to finally passing that with a governor who's not a mean person. I'm going to say it. I'm not a mean person. Not a mean person. Choose your words carefully, right?
We're trying.
All right. So, Sheba, did we cover? I think we covered the bulk of your bills, right? Is there anything for expungement or resentencing or record sealing, as we love to call it here? Are we doing anything with that again?
So we were forbidden on changing anything in our expungement bill because it takes effect July 1, 2026 now. Virginia State Police is on track to clear the records automatically of misdemeanor cannabis possession and misdemeanor cannabis intent to distribute. They will clear those records and people don't have to do anything. If there is a felony that involves cannabis, or if you have adjacent charges, you will have to petition, but that won't start until July 1, 2026. The automatic offenses will not start until October 1, 2026, but many of the clerks across the state, and it's important to note this, there's like 129 different localities. All of them have the authority to do things the way that they want to do them. But the majority of the clerks that we have spoken to and OES are working on a uniform petition so that each court doesn't have their own version of what a petition is. And they are committed to clearing out the automatic offenses as quickly as possible. So that's a huge thing. We were told don't touch the bill, let it go live and let them get some data first, but we will be returning to try to make sure that people don't have to keep going through this petition process. We were able to remove the fingerprinting requirement in our bill unless it's a case of mistaken identity or identity fraud. So no more going to a police station or Virginia State Police to be fingerprinted. We also were able to remove the fines and fees piece, so you will not have to pay for your petition if you go into the court. Now, at this current moment, people who have non-convictions, people who have actually been found not guilty or acquitted of an offense, have to pay $98 per charge. have to be fingerprinted again, and then have to send a request to a judge to ask a thing to be removed from their record that they were not convicted of. That is the most ridiculous thing that has been on our books since 1975, I think it was. But now individuals with lower level felonies and most misdemeanors, that's about 128 charges that were carved out at the very last minute last year, will no longer be eligible. And those charges are, it's a complex list of charges, but it's things like stalking. I can't even remember the list, y'all, but it's a ton of things that are on the list now that were not previously on the list. We would have had the most comprehensive expungement bill in the nation, but there was a negotiation to say, hey, we're gonna put in all these exclusions. So it's about 120 something charges that are now ineligible. But we're going to keep fighting to expand it. I am a firm believer that everybody deserves redemption and everybody deserves access to justice and not to have to live with the thing for the rest of their lives. So we're going to keep fighting. But we were kind of threatened to not do anything this year. But the bill does go live July 1, 2026, starting July 1, 2026. We're trying to also include juvenile expungement because that was not included. And the reasons are juvenile offenses are in a different court and they are handled in a different way and different code section. But there are attempts to get a juvenile expungement bill.
Any last comments on Senator Sturgill's expungement bill that he has up, SB 230?
No, it's just like a cleanup version of a bill, not a big deal.
That'd be my hot take on it, but yours are way better than mine.
Yeah, it's just a cleanup version. He won't let us do anything else.
All right, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna slide over here like this and have Sheba hang out for just 2 seconds before I slide Nigist into this panel, this spot, whatever this is called, spotlight. Because we know what people are here for, and they want to talk about adult use retail. Let me do let's do a quick scroll through though and look at some other bills that I found on our tracker. There will be more bills, and we will talk about adult use, and we will talk about the enforcement bill. And Sheba talked about Bill Desteff's attempt to roll back progress, which we aren't doing, Bill. Sorry, buddy. Not going to happen. But I look forward to killing this bill again for the 5th session in a row. Senator McDougal has a field test bill up, SB 145, marijuana field test, testimony as to the results. Anyone have any thoughts on that? Well, that's okay because I texted a defense attorney to ask him his thoughts on it, and he said, I don't like it.
Not gonna happen.
I don't like it. Does not.
We're gonna work to kill it.
But then he said, I've asked a few people about this, and he said he'd like to see something like an officer may testify to the administration and result of the field test, but not offer expert opinion as to chemical composition or legal classification. And I would definitely agree with his sentiment on that. So we'll be taking a deeper dive into McDougal's SB 145 and seeing if it holds water. And we'll have Dr. Peace, of course, involved in this discussion as well.
I'll just add to that, Jam, though, in that we're already doing fine with prosecuting cannabis-related DUIs. The Cannabis Public Health Advisory Council was briefed on a case study back in the autumn, and we know that the processes that they have in place for this are still working just like they were working before we legalized simple possession in 2021. And it's working, I guess. We have things that are already in place and already working, and it doesn't seem like there's much need to change.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. And as Nikas and Sheba have heard me say many times before, We do use the gold standard for DUID marijuana prosecution in Virginia. Given what other states are doing, what we're doing is the best way you could do it, given the limitations of science. And there isn't a special prosecutorial tool out there where you're going to blow in it and it's going to say this person is too high to drive. You could blow in it and it could say this person consumed cannabis, but again, that is not indicative of impairment. It's just indicative of consumption. What happens in Virginia is that someone gets pulled over, they do a roadside sobriety, the person fails that, then they move on to fluid testing, and if they move forward with prosecution, a forensic toxicologist is going to have to come in and testify to what those results on the blood test say. And we don't, as you said, we don't have any problem prosecuting marijuana DUID in Virginia. It's a relatively low number. I think it was maybe like 120 or so last year.
Yeah, and
tens of thousands of alcohol DUIs.
Yeah, exactly.
Nigist, I'm just scrolling through the list right now. If you want to track these bills a little easier, friends, we have a tracker on the Virginia NORML website, vanormal.org. And right at the top, you'll see 2026 marijuana-related bills, and you can click on that. And we do a pretty good job at keeping you up to date as to what bills are introduced and how they're moving through the legislature. Of course, we'll be doing a full refresh of that webpage after we finish up the conference. But for now, we do have our top bills there. And one of our top bills is HB 391. This is a bill we are revisiting from last year. We did pass this last year and it was vetoed by the governor for some insane reason. I'm done pretending like I'm going to be nice. Listen, let's just call it what it is. Sheba's giving me life.
Well, yeah, SB 391 or HB 391 is a very straightforward cleanup for the medical program. It just addresses some labeling things like making sure the THC is in milligrams on an edible product and in percentages on a flower product, which is pretty consistent with what most consumers expect. It also will change the expiration date, so it goes from the testing date instead of the product approval date, which again, great news for patients, and hopefully a standard that gets carried over to the adult use marketplace, because again, that is just good best practice for consumer safety.
Absolutely. It also does that labeling change that we've really needed for a long time in Virginia, but there were sort of political impediments to making this change. This will add new product definitions that exist in the real world but not in code, so that we have topical products labeled in a way that is appropriate for topical products. We have inhalable products still having the percentage-based labeling, and then we have edible products with a milligram per serving labeling. I don't know about you, but I don't need to see the percentage on an edible because I'm not doing math to figure out what's in the product. I don't do math when I take Tylenol. I just read the milligrams that are in each tablet and we're good to go. And that's what we're going to do, hopefully, after we pass this bill.
Right.
So
I just want to give a shout out to the sponsor of HB 391, Alex Askew, because he's a delegate who's been really supporting the medical program and has been great at carrying the bill. Like, it's wonderful when you can get a sponsor. It's even better when you have a sponsor who just understands it and will explain and defend it incredibly well. And Alex has done a great job.
He really has, and he's willing to go to bat for patients, for the people who rely on this program, and that's not necessarily what's happening in the rest of the legislature. He's such a strong patron. We're so fortunate to work with him. And there have been some asks of him to water down his bill, to eliminate patient protections, and he has stood strong in support of patients who rely on this access and said, no, we're not going to do that. So hats off to Delegate Askew. I'm going to lump a few bills together here and just sort of talk about them as one bucket. There's an entity out in California called the Ryan's Law Group, and they they're working their way through the country trying to make sure that terminally ill patients in hospitals have access to medical cannabis. Now, in Virginia, you were already statutorily authorized to possess medical cannabis if you are a patient pretty much everywhere, except for like a public school. Like, it's very limited where you cannot possess medical cannabis in Virginia, and a hospital is not one of those places where it's restricted. Now, obviously, you can't smoke inside, in buildings, indoors, in Virginia. It doesn't matter what you're smoking. You can't smoke inside, and we're not going to obviously change that law. But if you're in a hospital right now, there's no law that says, no, you can't have medical cannabis products. Maybe your hospital has a policy, but it's not the law. Nonetheless, this organization, very well intended, has asked for some members of the legislature to introduce bills, and there have been a variety of them introduced. Delegate Keys Gamara has one, Delegate Shin has one, and then Senator Favola has sort of a work group version of it. Now, what we've done is gone to these patrons and say, hey, this is already the law in Virginia, but if you did want to include hospitals specifically, then we would just add them to the law we passed many, many years ago that provides that legal authority to the people who work there, because the patient already has the legal authority to possess their medical cannabis. Who doesn't have the legal authority unless we provide it to them are the people who provide care in these facilities. So a number of people who are, in hospice or in nursing facilities, they rely on medical cannabis, and they need someone to help administer it. They need someone to receive delivery for them, because of course delivery is the law of the land in Virginia. And if you aren't physically able to get up and go answer the door and get your medical cannabis, that should not deprive you of the right to access that health care. If you can't physically drive yourself to the dispensary and pick it up, that shouldn't deny you of the right to access that health care. And so, sure, could we add hospitals to that group of essentially employees that need that statutory protection? Sure. And that is the recommendation that we have made, is to simply change from their approach, which is too narrow and introduces some language that could be problematic for the rest of patients in Virginia. We don't want to set the idea that it should be limited to terminally ill patients, because it is not limited to terminally ill patients today. It is just limited to patients who are authorized to use medical cannabis. So, no opposition to the objection, but we have provided feedback to these bill patrons that we'd like to see the bill in the proper posture, and that it's providing the actual statutory authority that's needed, not just feel-good language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then we talked about parental rights. We talked about resentencing. Let's talk about, okay, now we're up to the big ones. And so, Niga, Shiba, do you want to do enforcement first and then do retail?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Because that's shorter, and then adult use retail, I'm sure the audience is going to have the most questions about that, so we can tee that up and go into Q&A, because that's a big bill, and I'd rather just answer what people want to know about it.
Okay,
it's a monster.
It's a monster.
It is, isn't it? So enforcement is a bill. It's a more fleshed out version of a bill that we saw last year. We had bipartisan legislation last year. Senator Marsden had it in the Senate, and Delegate Coiner had it in the House. And it was an enforcement bill that would have put together a work group. And now this year's version of it by Senator Aird, SB 543, still contains that work group language and establishes that work group. Virginia NORML is a named entity in that work group, and it would put together law enforcement, state agencies, and then policy experts, so that we can collectively talk about how enforcement is happening in the Commonwealth, what the laws are, and how to use them. This isn't not about criminalizing consumers. It's about saying, here are the laws that are in place in Virginia. Here's what people's rights are, and here's what's not permissible. So, often we hear, well, I'm too confused. I don't know what's legal. I don't, yeah, we know that store looks like it's selling a bunch of weed to kids, but marijuana is legal, and we're not certain what's legal and what's not. This is intended to help clarify that. Most importantly, to say, hey, here's what consumers are lawfully authorized to do, and then here's what's not permissible, especially when it comes to predatory behavior targeting consumers. Then it also does some other things, and Nigist, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about that.
Sure, and I just want to reiterate what JM said. When we talk about enforcement, we are not talking about the criminalization of individuals. We are talking about ensuring that businesses are complying with the state law and rules and regulations. And so this is really a consumer protection bill that's focused on two things: helping to address consumer confusion and ensuring that the CCA and other bodies have the ability to appropriately penalize businesses that refuse to comply with the laws of the land. And it does this with two mechanisms. First and foremost, on the consumer safety, there's a decal program. So basically, if you are a legal licensed dispensary in Virginia, CCA will issue you a decal that you have to display prominently with like a QR code, so somebody can go look up and verify on the CCA website that this is a legal and licensed dispensary. And that's important because not only does it make it obvious and visible in a uniform way across the state for people to identify a legal dispensary, it also makes it easier for local law enforcement, zoning officials, and others to be able to check, is this a legal and licensed cannabis dispensary before they go into a place. The flip side of that is if you are claiming to sell cannabis, which means it doesn't matter what's actually in the package. What matters is how you labeled and marketed the package. So if you have products that you are claiming contain more than 2 milligrams of THC or are outside of the laws, the ratio set in our hemp program, our consumable hemp program for human consumption, and you have products that claim to have 75 milligrams of THC in one bar and things like that, it doesn't matter what's actually inside that package. If you saw Dr. Peace's presentation, you know there's always discrepancies. What matters is a business that was not allowed to sell cannabis claimed to be selling cannabis to people in Virginia. And so if you don't have a decal and an inspector or a local zoning officer comes in and sees that you have products labeled and marketing cannabis, you are now liable for a $10,000 a day fine for each product and for selling cannabis without a decal. If you falsify a decal, you pay a $10,000 fine for every day that you had that falsified decal up in your shop. So these are, again, not even for the businesses, we're not looking at criminal consequences. We're looking at business appropriate consequences. So we're talking about fines. And then what I think is really important, especially for local government to know about, is that if you have a repeat offender, they can lose their alcohol license, they can lose their tobacco license, and the local government can take away their business license. That's not the first strike. That's after you have a second round of violations, and it would take months and months to prove and get to that point. So there's an appropriate time and due process for businesses to clarify. But again, if you have a repeat offense, all of those agencies have the authority to revoke your ability to do business. And the alcohol and tobacco licenses are critical to that because so many of these are in corner stores and shops where alcohol and tobacco are their real money makers, and the cannabis is only there as long as it makes them money. And so what this bill is trying to do is change the financial incentives for businesses so that businesses want to comply with the cannabis law, want to support this. And this is drawing heavily from Maryland's enforcement model based off of some legislation they passed in 2025. The bill also authorizes CCA to seize product that does not meet the labeling and packaging standards that we have in Virginia. And that part I think is really important because even while these cases are being adjudicated, what happened in Maryland, New York, many other states in the early days before they did label and packaging enforcement was you would get caught up in months waiting for product testing to come back and all of this stuff. And these products would still just be on the shelves for months being sold to minors. And so the point of the seizures is really to get the product off of the shelves and out of the hands of kids while you go through a process. Because again, if you are even claiming to have an unregulated amount of cannabis in something and you're not allowed to, that is consumer fraud. Like You are the Commonwealth of Virginia and its citizens have not allowed you to do that, and there is no oversight over your business, and you're flouting the laws and contraventions, which also means that you're undermining the new retail market that we're trying to stand up. And so enforcement has to go hand in hand with adult use, because if you're not shutting down illicit, unregulated sales, you have an even more unlevel playing field in those early days, because you've got one group of small entrepreneurs who are trying to follow the laws, apply for licenses, pay for fees, and pay all the money for the security cameras and everything else they need to do for the regulations, competing against people who just keep bringing in garbage product and don't care about consumer experiences or safety. And that's not the marketplace that NORML, a consumer advocacy organization, is trying to stand up. So again, enforcement needs to go hand in hand with adult use.
And Nick Verk from Metro Leaf DC was here earlier today, and he talked a lot about how irritating it was for him operating in DC, being a compliant business, but then the smoke shop or the t-shirt store next door is can undercut by 50% because they're moving illicit product. And he was so annoyed that DC wasn't taking action, or he felt like they had taken maybe 50% action and gotten about 50% reduction in these illicit stores. And that was such an impact to him as a compliant business. And so I said, well, we have a bill that really addresses, first and foremost, protecting consumers from predatory behaviors, from fraudulent behaviors, but also it does have that clearly benefit to compliant operators who don't want to compete with unregulated businesses.
Yeah. And again, this is something that we see across all sectors of the economy. This is not unique to cannabis, but it is unique in how we have to tackle it, because cannabis is a special little beast of its own.
It sure is. And speaking of special beasts, as much as I'm dreading it, let's talk. Oh, I got real big that way. Let me slide back. Let's talk about the adult use bills. Should we bucket it by chamber and do it that way?
Sure.
Do you have a better idea?
I don't. I think maybe I think let's start with the House bill, because there was the least amount of changes in that one yesterday.
Okay, so
a good framework to talk about, and then we can just talk about how the Senate bills might be different. How about that?
Great. So yesterday, no, it's Friday. What day is it?
It's Friday, y'all. Friday.
7 years ago on Friday, we were able to hear three of the cannabis adult use retail sales bills, and Delegate Krizek is the patron of the commission bill in the House. And this is important for both this part and for the later part. Typically, when there is a commission bill, procedurally in Virginia, that becomes the vehicle for all of the bills. So maybe there's a commission bill, and then maybe 7 other delegates introduce a bill. Typically, all of those bills get rolled into the commission bill, because the commission is the legislative body that has put in the work to make sure we're getting the policy right, okay? But remember that, put that in the remembering part of your brain. We only have one bill in the House, Delegate Krizek's. It's the commission bill. That was heard on Friday. Sheba and Nigist were able to be there. I was able to be here, and that moved forward. Nigist, do you want to break down some of the primary components of that? And everyone understand, this is where the bill is now. This is not where the bill is going to be on Wednesday. We are just at the beginning of this process. Don't base your business on what we're telling you today. This is an overview of where the bill is, We'll do more deep dives as it moves forward. But Nigus, why don't you go ahead and give us a little
Sure.
What for now?
So let me start with from a consumer perspective. In the House, HB 642 has a start date for the market of November 1st for sales. That's one of the, I think, top things everybody's trying to keep in mind. It creates an impact licensee category, and that is not a license type. It is a type of ownership group, to be clear, an impact license. And there are 7 criteria. In the most recent version of the bill, you have to meet 2 out of the 7. At one point, it was 4 out of the 7. And those criteria include things, I'm not going to try to remember all of them for you, but it includes things like having a past cannabis conviction or being related to someone who has one, being a distressed farmer, going to a school with a certain percentage of Pell Grant recipients and things like that. Apologies, my assistant is joining us now.
Love it. It's my favorite part of every Zoom with Nigist.
So sales date would start on November 1. I believe applications would open around July 1 to September 1 for different types. So I think for hemp and medical processors, the applications would open up on July 1. And that's because those are very, those are, for medical operators, the regulations in particular are very easy to write for that application process because the CCA is already regulating them. They have already applied for licenses in Virginia, right? And are working through that. In order for the additional types of licenses like micro business licenses, individual retail, and others to be issued, CCA has to write the regulations and design the applications. So those applications wouldn't open up until September 1 in this bill. And then licenses would start being awarded, I think, October 1, and sales would start November 1. So I think that's a really strong opening. And that opening licensing focuses on 100 micro businesses, which is focused on helping farmers and distressed farmers and folks from the hemp space to convert over, but also balancing that with making sure we have, and I want to just be really clear that I said this a bit in my panel yesterday, but for folks who weren't able to see that one, in the first 2 years of turning on adult use, the market is going to be really volatile, right? You're trying to kind of keep the market within an acceptable margin of error. So that means sometimes you might have a little oversupply. You just don't want to have so much oversupply that your small businesses collapse because they cannot make back their early capital. And then you're going to have some moments with undersupply, and that's going to be annoying mostly for consumers because prices might be a little high or you won't be able to find your strains. But it just takes time in those early days for all of your cultivators to get up and running and for all the retailers to get up and running. And during that time, everybody's just trying to, make good business decisions. And it's always going to be a little bit tricky. But I think that the way they've got this set up right now is the best way to kind of keep us in that safe zone of just enough a requirement for a large initial surge of licensing, but also making sure that CCA can actually regulate the people that they're licensing. Because what we've seen in states like New York, they licensed so many, they weren't able to monitor, and they keep having scandals and issues with product quality in that marketplace. On the other hand, you look at Illinois, and they put so much effort into scoring applications. They delayed their retail sales by 2 years due to litigation from social equity licensees who were rightfully suing the state to make sure that their scores were accurate and they were actually getting the fair shot they were told. So that brings me to, what is the license structure in these bills? And this is going to be consistent between both the House and Senate sides. As far as I'm aware, there's another special bill we'll get to later that might be a little different. But from the commission bills, HB 642 and SB 542, the application process is very straightforward for new licensees. It's going to be basically a pass-fail, similar to what they did for the last round of the medical licenses, that last 5th license that was issued last year. It will be kind of a pass-fail, do you meet at these standards? Do you have the documentation that proves your impact licensee, status? Are you actually a hemp farmer, right? These types of things. And then folks will go into a lottery. People have different feelings about lotteries, but I'll tell you from my experience in the cannabis space over the last, 7-8 years, everything ends up going to a lottery. You cannot score these applications by merit. There are far more people qualified to enter this marketplace than there is room for those businesses in the very initial year. And again, the number one choke point for this is how many staffers does CCA need to effectively regulate this market, and how many resources can the CCA get in place for those new licensees? Because if you hand out a bunch of licenses, but you also don't have programs for those impact licensees, technical support, education opportunities for folks who need to upskill in certain areas, and also grants, capital funding, different ways for folks to access capital and really addressing the barriers to that. Those impact licensees, it doesn't matter when you issue them, if those resources aren't online, they're not going to have the benefit of that to help them in those transitions. And so we have to we're laying the track, and building the railroad as the train is coming down it. And we're just trying to do it in the best way to keep the train on the tracks and the passengers safe.
Yeah, and we did not have an administration over the last 4 years that was willing to put down any track in advance. In fact, they were happy to take the track away altogether. So we don't have a state agency that was able to ramp up and prepare. They were, in that they care deeply about this and have put their own work in, but they weren't provided resources from the prior administration to get ready.
Yes. And I mean, major shout out to the staffers at the CCA, because they have been doing the best they can. And I mean, I highly recommend checking out the CCA reports website, because you can see patient surveys, provider surveys. They've been great with kind of updating certain aspects of the medical program regs, but they haven't been able to really use these last 4 years to get ready for adult use the way a normal administration would have.
We have a comment in the, not a question, but more so a comment, Nigist, and let's go ahead and show that, and then I know you have a response. So Ambrogi Acre says, the cultivators need more time than a month or two to get product to Virginia shelves. All this is going to do is promote out-of-state products being sold in our state. And before you take a stab at it, I will say what promotes right, obviously out-of-state products are being sold in Virginia on the unregulated and illicit market, and that will continue to be the predominant market until retail stores are established by the state and allowed to operate. I'll also say that we thought about this 100 years ago when we started the medical cannabis program, and they can already wholesale to each other, and they will be able to wholesale to new businesses as well. Not that would be sufficient to supply the entirety, but we do have one stopgap measure in there, and that is to allow wholesale amongst operators. Your thoughts, Nigist?
I would agree. The cultivators will absolutely need more time than a month or two, because keep in mind, you cannot start cultivating your cannabis product, even if you are currently a hemp operator. Nothing that you are growing in the hemp program is going to be movable into the medical or into an adult use program. Nobody will be able to start cultivating for adult use until they have an adult use cultivator's license. And so that's why I said the first 2 years are really tricky, because this market is also, not only is it limited by the staffing oversight at the CCA, it is limited by the actual speed of the plant. And it just takes time to have enough in-state cultivation ready to go. But at the same time, as JM said, we are trying to find the best possible outcomes out of a lot of, frankly, crappy outcomes. We are not getting to work on and have the perfect first year. We're trying to balance solving 3 core problems for policymakers. And for policymakers, I'm going to keep it in their frame because this is what they're thinking top of mind. Number one, and this is not in a priority order, a fair market, consumer access and safety, consumer and youth safety, let's say, and maximizing tax revenue. Like Virginia is hurting for cash right now. All states are struggling because of major federal cuts to different parts of healthcare and other types of funding. We also now have a Democratic governor, and we're seeing across the country that the current federal government is using budgets and everything they can against their political enemies and politicizing things that are not supposed to be politicized in America. So this is a very volatile year overall, and we have to remember that cannabis policy is taking place amidst that broader context. So we're trying to optimize the best outcomes on all of those. I support the earliest sales date we can get and an aggressive conversion fee for medical operators, and using the medical and hemp processors and others who can convert in those early days to help move the transition. Because one thing we also know is, as James said, out-of-state products are being sold all over the state right now. Like all of the hemp products, we know because we hear from struggling Virginia hemp farmers that those are not, the gas station hemp is not even coming from our own Virginia farmers. It's coming from who knows where. And so we know the market is much larger than what we're capturing in data right now. And if we go off of just, let's say, Maryland's first year of legal sales, which was $900 million, it was a $900 million market, so we can round that up to $1 billion. Even if you flipped over the medical operators and the hemp processors, they could only address maybe 10% of the total addressable market in like the first, let's say, 6 months of sales. And there's just not, like, incumbent operators are just not the main competition for most cannabis retail outlets, because there are only 23 dispensaries open in the state right now. We're not even at the full 30, right, JM, for the medical program. And in reality, and we see this time and time again in other states with the adult use transitions, people will go to the dispensary that is closest to them and that they like the most. And there's a whole lot of real estate, and there's a whole lot of great Virginia brands that are going to capture the rest of that 90% of the marketplace. And making sure that they get licensed and that our impact licensees have the technical and financial support they need to succeed is also important. And so again, we're just trying to balance that safety with the opportunity with the tax revenue, which we should come back to, JM. On the tax revenue, we have two different tax rates really being proposed in the adult use program. The commission bill took a lot of the analysis very seriously, that if your taxes are too high, you slow down that illicit economic activities transition into the formal market, and you actually can lose some long-term tax revenue over time. So in the commission bills, the tax revenue was set at a very reasonable, I believe it's 8% for the cannabis excise tax. And when you add that on top of the sales tax, and then up to 3.5% for the retail, for the local tax, I think it's I'm sorry, I said all those numbers and I didn't do my math. I think it's like 11 or 12 something percent. So it's very reasonable tax rate for the retail market. I think there's another bill that has a higher rate than that, but again, its budgets are king, and I think we're hoping we can keep it in that low teens, because we've seen that be really ideal in the first few years of a market.
And it's important that I know this is a priority for Delegate Krizak to stay competitive with Maryland. There was a study commissioned by the Medical Cannabis Program, survey style, asking a small number of patients what they thought about the program. And a lot of them, of course, said that prices were higher than they would like. Of course, we know this is entirely typical in a nascent market, but even more so in a market that hasn't expanded like Virginia has not, that has only 100,000 patients total, which is really small for a state with 8.5 million people. But given that we only have 23 dispensaries, that's kind of what you get when it's not convenient. You don't go to the legal store. So a lot to work through there. Let's talk about, I see another question. Okay, so this is about the ability to have multiple licenses. And yes, so while the medical program does mandate vertical integration, we do not mandate vertical integration, nor do we necessarily prohibit vertical integration in the adult use retail sales bill, in particular when it comes to smaller operators. The legislative intent was to allow smaller operators to be able to have more licenses and be more restrictive when it comes to larger operators. And so this question asks if it's possible to have a hemp license, a manufacturing license for adult use, and then also a testing license.
That is a wonderful combination to ask for, because it is actually one of the few combinations that's a no. And the reason is testing. Testing is one of those licenses that if you have it for financial conflict of interest reasons, you cannot have any other financial interests in the cannabis industry if you're in the testing lab space. It's a really specific lane, and that's kind of standard practice across the board, not just in cannabis, but in many other industries, because the whole point is third-party lab verification, meaning the lab has no tie to the business.
And then,
sorry, go ahead.
No, we had that hemp question yesterday too. And then could you have a VDAX license for hemp and a CCA license for adult use?
And I believe that's going to still be permitted. It's unclear still how in both statute and regs, like it's unlikely that those would be things that you could co-locate or how you might co-locate them. And I'll tell you the reason why is largely because you need to have the same types of SOPs for anything going through your manufacturing machines, because if you put a dirty product in certain machines, you will be out of production for days, if not weeks, while you take it entirely apart and clean it to decontaminate it. And so that's the one thing that still needs to kind of be sussed out, I think, in legislation, exactly how that's going to come around. But there's no reason why, in fact, there are some like large multi-state operators that have in-state hemp licenses and also adult use licenses in certain states.
See how that shakes out at the end of the day. Another question from T-Pain, not necessarily related to AU, but I think we can answer it real quickly. T-Pain asks, is there room for a nurse to work with CCA to help with education and holding cannabis businesses to established regs? I've been looking on the job site and I don't see any CCA jobs.
I'm sure there would be. I think that the CCA website is probably not yet posting all of the openings we expect to see for adult use. I think they've got some openings up to start collecting resumes, but there's going to be a lot more to come. There will also be room for, there's a CFAC that will be reviewing the Public Health Advisory Council, which will have a role in reviewing and providing oversight on certain regs. And I think there's providers that are on that and in a few other places. But yeah, it remains to be seen, but it's a good question to look for.
And additionally, in at least some of the bills, there is an effort to add more seats to the Cannabis Control Authority's board of directors so that the current governor not only can appoint people that align with her policy objectives, but also so that to address this very specific issue there, where we are perhaps wanting to include healthcare providers with actual expertise in cannabis. It's not enough this is for every legislator that's listening or every regulator that's listening. Just because they're a doctor doesn't mean they have any expertise in cannabis. And when you want people to advise on policy and regulation making, you want people with actual expertise in that area, not just people with a title that is not related. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. All right. Sheba, do you have any thoughts that need to take aim at the CRESEC bill in particular? No? Okay.
Not gonna touch that. Not gonna touch that. And it's kind of loud here, so I don't have anything that's like significant. You
Okay.
know, it's a monster of a bill, and there are a lot of things that need to be kind of fleshed out. But things will change. Things will change over time before we get to a final version. I think that's important for people to know, and that's why public testimony is important. So, while a lot of people want to show up at the General Assembly with like impacting the room, it would have been really significant to start the conversations before we got here, because it is very difficult to make the changes once they're already in motion. And you know, I know that like that's a hard thing when amendments and substitutes are happening, but the conversations have been going on for a few years, and that's why they kind of move the way they're moving. But yeah, there's a lot to be worked through. There's a lot to be fleshed out, and the priority is always going to be making sure that there's safety, making sure that there's as little criminalization as possible as we seek to like truly legalize this process. Because for 4 years we've been in a situation where people don't know what the hell Virginia has done. We
Right.
celebrated legalizing July 1, 2021, but like there were still people who were confused about what they can grow at home, what they can sell in a retail store, if they can sell in a retail store. How do you transport across state lines? Is it legal? Is it not legal? All the things. And we're here now, and this is the opportunity to give your input on a process that could impact you. So, keep reaching out to the legislators about like what your concerns are. But you know,
Yeah.
we're moving.
I want to echo what Sheba said in particular, that like we saw this happen in 2020 when we had the last Democratic trifecta. When you have a big swing like this, there's so much stuff that needs to get done. And when Sheba was talking earlier about the progress on expungement, I was just thinking about how when I first met Sheba, getting that constitutional amendment done was like one of the first things that you were talking about, I think. And like here we are all these years later, and like this law is going into effect on July 1, and we've just passed that constitutional amendment. It takes years for us to get to this point. And when you get to the committee meetings and it looks like they're just going really fast because they just want to get out because of a snowstorm, like what happened this past Friday, yeah, that's part of it. But they're also still very much taking the conversation seriously. They are reading your emails. Somebody is keeping track of what you say. When you click on those NORML action alerts, they move the needle and it matters. So please stay engaged, and please keep following the issue, and don't feel like what happens in committee is the only thing that's happening on this legislation. Committees are procedure, and a lot of the time you're trying to keep the bill alive because you can keep fixing a bill that's alive. You can't fix a bill that's not out of committee. So it's not over till it's over. Follow this every day. And if committee is like, we got 5 minutes for public comment, don't take it personally. It's not because they don't care. It's because they're all just trying to get through the day, and they're still going to listen to you some way, somehow, if you reach out to them.
Yeah, I guess you're so right. I mean, obviously, when we're in committee, we're moving the bill. We're not there to be surprised. We all generally know what's going to happen. Sometimes we'll do some really technical amendments on the fly, but large, difficult conversations, negotiations don't happen in that committee room. That doesn't mean your testimony isn't valid, isn't warranted, isn't respected. But I will also add this: when you see that they're giving 8 minutes for each side, and the chair says, say your name and if you support the bill, the best thing you can do is follow the chair's direction. Say your name and if you support the bill. Don't get into some long description about who you are. He doesn't care. If they did, they would have asked for that. This is procedural. Just do what they're asking, and then that's appreciated. And honestly, it makes your testimony even more powerful because you followed the directions, unlike everyone who comes after you and then annoys them.
And there is a time for that long personal story. It's just not in a rushed committee moment. That's why we always, every time Sheba, JM, and I have done this, we always start with, you have to be advocating outside of session. Mm-hmm. This is the session update, but like the advocacy is happening year round. I also just want to add one really important thing that happened in the hearing for HB 642. I know we're running a little long, but there was a really great moment in committee where a Republican delegate asked the Family Foundation, who was there in opposition of the bill, and gave their remarks. And a delegate, Will Moorfield, who's been on the Joint Commission with Delegate Krizik, asked the Family Foundation guy point blank, "What do you propose as a solution?" And then did a wonderful job presenting the bipartisan case for cannabis legalization by pointing out, using the Dry County example in Southwest, that prohibition doesn't work and legalization does. And as a result, that bill passed with bipartisan unanimous support out of Subcommittee 5. And the day before, we did not think that that was going to happen. And it matters. The advocacy that happens over time moves the needle, because I think 5 years ago, I don't know if Will Moorfield would have held that down for us the way that he did on Friday. I saw in the comments, JM, somebody asked, any support for hospitality and cafes? That's a great question. There is, and I think this is where one of the strengths, I think, that came out of the Joint Commission process is a lot of the things they know they need to work on and they want to include, and they heard from testimony this summer and fall that they wanted to do, like hospitality and different types of cannabis-related events and permitting and things like that. Rather than rush to a framework, they've put it in the bill that CCA needs to work on a proposal and come back to the legislature with some ideas. And that's, I think, the right way to do it, because we're not going to have the supply to really support hospitality events, things like that in this first year. And remember, none of these laws will go into effect until July 1 anyways. So for 2026, we're really only talking about maximum 6 months of a legal marketplace, probably less than that. So we'll be able to come back this time next year. We're going to be hashing that out. So if that's something that's important to you, stay engaged with the CCA this year. Watch what happens in the summer. Usually those reports come out around November, and reach out to JM and NORML and others with your, if you've got specific policy needs or pain points. That's what JM is great at listening for.
And thank you for that question, RVA Cannabis Company. It is absolutely a year two priority. What Niga said is, of course, factually correct, because she said it out loud. Listen, it is not just the business interest around that, but a really important frame for consumption venues. And I encourage everyone to use that language. It tells you exactly what we're talking about. It doesn't add any layer of interpretation. We are talking about consumption venues, specifically licensed consumption venues. This takes a significant burden off of law enforcement, who, as we know, has already experienced confusion around cannabis laws. So right now, if you are in, let's say, law enforcement, and you want to know if this restaurant is able to serve alcohol, you can see their liquor license. So now they're not confused. If they're going to some one-off event, a wedding or a banquet or something, those events are able to get a permit to serve alcohol for that singular event. And now law enforcement isn't confused. Everyone knows what the laws are, and we know that this thing is, they're following the rules, and that's good to go. And that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about licensing consumption venues, making it clear to everyone what the rules are and that they are intending to follow them. Taking that burden off of law enforcement is the largest argument for moving forward with this. And if you are a locality that's interested in this topic, if you're, I don't know, a member of a cannabis advisory task force in a locality that was perhaps has a mission statement that you're supposed to look at ways to address the impacts of adult use retail cannabis, and let's say you're in a huge vacation destination in Virginia, then this should be a top priority for your locality. You should care about this. If people are coming to your locality and cannabis is now legal in Virginia and you're already a tourism destination, they're going to come there and they're going to want to experience legal cannabis. And if you don't give them somewhere to experience legal cannabis, then your hand-wringing fantasies will come true where people smoke cannabis outside instead of in their hotel room. And so if you're going to stand there and say, oh, well, we don't want our city to smell like weed, great, then you need to give people somewhere to lawfully consume a product that is legal for them to consume. Don't waste your time making up what's going to happen when we already know what's going to happen and what the policy solutions are. Please focus your efforts on real, meaningful efforts. Put this in your legislative agenda and send that to the General Assembly and say, hey, we want to see consumption venues licensed so we know what is lawful and what isn't. And I highly encourage you to use that frame because that's going to hold a lot more water with the legislature than, well, I want to open a place where people could come smoke weed and get high with their friends. They don't care.
I will just also add, if hospitality is something you're really prioritizing for your vision of your future in cannabis, reach out to the people who have consumption lounges today. Reach out to folks who are in this space because it is another one of those very challenging business models, and for different reasons right now. I'm not saying it can't work. I'm saying make sure you're talking to folks and really working out your business model and your financial models for how that will work, because 280E, the further you get through the supply chain in cannabis, there's a reason why delivery and consumption are so difficult to succeed in, and it's because you start to get really screwed over by 280E, which is a tax issue, a federal tax issue. Rescheduling will largely address that for businesses.
Hopefully.
The
way the federal government's supposed to work.
Yes, hopefully. But that all still remains to be seen. And again, just the further down, that's something I was a little light on the license structure because I know there was a presentation yesterday that really went into the deep dive on the different licenses, but there is delivery, there's transport, micro business, there's 5 tiers of cultivation from 5 to 35,000 square feet. And then there's a dual license category for the medical operators so that they are required to maintain patient supply as well as adult use. And within those for the medical operators, I mentioned there's a conversion fee proposed. That fee is ranging from various proposals in the past few years, from the CCA board will set it to $1 million to $15 million in one of the bills that's been put forward this year. I have a lot of feelings about exorbitant fees because they really come off of the backs of patients. And in New York, they had a $20 million fee. Eventually, they codified it at $15 million, but the damage was done. I think they've had 20% of their medical dispensaries have closed. One of their medical operators just turned in their license, couldn't even sell it to recoup, basic costs or maintain patient access. And there are significant portions of New York State that, instead of seeing the medical program expand to 80 dispensaries like was intended in the MRTA, the decision to have a punitive fee mostly punished patients and has left pediatric patients in particular. There was a lot of advocacy from parents in Buffalo because all of the medical dispensaries in Buffalo closed down. And that's the second largest city in the state.
As I think we're just about ready to transition into the Senate bills, I'm gonna since you touched on it, Nigus, you opened that can of worms, and you know that this is really such an issue for us at NORML. There are a number of proposals moving through the legislature right now about what sort of punitive fee, and let's be real, that's what it is, what sort of punitive fee the existing operators in the state should pay. Now, it's fine to say you should pay a conversion fee that's either based on the volume of sales you did, like Maryland did, literally just right to our north. Maryland did that. They said, hey, we just passed legalization. You're going to be ready to go on July 1. You're going to pay a fee that is commensurate with the type of volume you're doing. And if you can't do this, then you can exit the marketplace. And that's fine. But to say, hey, you're just this handful of operators and you have to pay $20 million in order to keep your business. And if you don't pay $20 million and you don't get to sell any product until everyone gets to sell product, we're going to take your business away from you. Sure, that hurts that company, but that decimates the medical cannabis program. And there are people who rely on that. And these are the medical cannabis operators in the state. They don't have a magic pot of money that's set aside for whatever fantastical fee comes up. They'll pay what they have to pay, and your prices will go up as a consumer. And not just your prices will go up as a consumer in medical, your prices will be already high as an adult use consumer. I'm not sure if people are confused about how basic economic principles work, but the cost of doing business is directly related to the cost of goods sold. And the people who pay for the cost of goods are the consumers, not the businesses. Right?
And that's where I think the fee is important. I think there's definitely a lot that can be put in, but I think we have to remember two things. All of the medical operators already applied for licenses. It's not like they're skipping a lottery or things like that. They already have gone through a competitive application selection process or a lottery in order to be issued their licenses by the CCA. Two, they're the only operators that are functioning in compliance with regs that are 99% the regs you need to comply with for adult use. There are many folks in the hemp space who might have opted in to that level of testing rigor and things like that, but most haven't, and that's because financially it's difficult to run a business like that when nobody else is running a business like that. Nobody else that you're competing with is running a business like that. And lastly, the fee should be reasonable. Like I don't think anybody here thinks that any of these companies should be getting a break. We just think, especially because that fee, 75% of those fees is going directly into the business loan fund. But that's why it's also important that it's a fee amount that companies will actually pay. Because again, in New York, the fee was also supposed to go towards community reinvestment, but they delayed the start by so long. And then they put the fee so high, they didn't get 200 million. They've still only gotten, I think the maximum they've gotten from any of their operators is 5 million. And so, yeah, they're still not even getting that. And it was years delayed, et cetera, et cetera. And so we just have we need that business loan funding before impact licenses are issued. We need it in the bank and we need it available so that when licenses are issued, there's a source of funds for applicants to turn to the day that they need them. So we need to have that fee and we need to make sure that it gets paid as part of that turning on process. And it's good that it's going to the places it is, but we also need that fee to be paid because 0% of 200 million is still $0.
It has to be reasonable. I mean, it's great that this is what we want. We want them to pay a fee so that we have these funds available. They have to be able to pay it. And we cannot hold medical cannabis patients hostage in this negotiation and say, well, listen, if these companies don't pay some, extortion fee that's $1 gajillion, then we're just going to take away your access to medical cannabis. I'm not here for that.
And the last thing I'll say on this too is that the processors get turned on at the same time as folks from hemp. And I think all of the bills that are being considered at the current moment. So it's not only the medical side that's getting this kind of flip the switch opportunity. And again, these incumbents, both the hemp folks and the medical folks, help stabilize the marketplace because having just a few more retail shelves for wholesalers to put their products on and having just a few more, indoor grows from the medical side to help ensure there's product on the shelves just stabilizes that market while everybody is getting up and running and ensures that consumers still have a safe place to consume safe tested product.
Absolutely. So on Friday, 6 years ago, we also had the Senate bills move, and two of them, there are 3 bills actually in the Senate right now. 2 of them were ready for prime time at 8 o'clock in the morning and were heard. And this was Senator Aird. I'm going to wing it here. Senator Aird's SB 542. Is that right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Senator Aird's SB 542 is the commission bill, even though it is just slightly different than the House commission bill.
And the biggest difference is sales don't start until January 1. I think most of the application timelines are still the same on that front. And then, James, do you remember what else?
I don't, because this is the one that I was here for and you were there for. But what did happen, I do know. Oh, no, wait, I was, whatever. That's not the point. The point is Senator Rouse has a bill also, and his bill got rolled into the commission bill. So when we're talking about the Senate version, we are talking about Aird's bill, which Rouse's gets rolled into. That means his bill, whatever was in his bill, essentially goes away, and he is now a chief co-patron of Senator Aird's bill. And then there was another bill that was introduced by Senator Lucas. And it's very different than either of the commission bills.
Most notably because it ends the CCA and rolls the CCA into ABC and some of it into VDAX, which I think is counterintuitive, and in particular for consumer priorities, which is safe access as soon as possible. Doing a bureaucratic reorg doesn't usually speed up your timeline for implementation. Doesn't matter what the bureaucracy is, but that's even more true in the public sector bureaucracy. So I think I will also just say I think the short summary for the Lucas bill is it's a negotiating position. And that's honestly what all of these bills are at this point, is a negotiating position. Jam, did you want to add more on where you think that bill is going?
No, I think it's exactly what it's there. It's some sort of bargaining chip, and there's, as you alluded to earlier, there are a lot of other priorities, and we've seen this before with cannabis bills where they get treated like political footballs, and the bill itself is not the real issue. It's what they're trying to use it as for leverage. And I think there's probably something like that potentially tied to this bill, some sort of political interest that just hasn't quite made itself abundantly clear to all of us yet. This bill does seem to be driven in large part by alcohol interests. We have heard this in many states. I have heard this here in Virginia about alcohol's interest to take control of cannabis away from the CCA and give it to ABC, their preferred regulator. Now, let's rewind a few years ago to 2020 when we were passing decriminalization, and we knew we were going to pass legalization in the next year. And so we wanted to be really prepared, and we had a work group and a study both at the same time, because if one's good, two is better. And in the Governor Northam's marijuana legalization work group, which produced a 500-page report on how the state could best go about legalizing and regulating the retail sale of cannabis to adults 21 years and older, there was a legal and regulatory committee. And I and Travis Hill chaired that committee. Travis Hill at the time was the head of ABC. And with our full chests, Travis and I said, we do not want cannabis to be regulated by ABC. We want an agency with specific expertise for cannabis, because cannabis is not alcohol. And at the time, we had a medical cannabis program, and I don't know in what world someone says, you know who I think should be the administrator for a medical program, a healthcare program? People who sell alcohol. That they're not experts in the medical application of cannabis. And I personally and professionally believe very strongly that we deserve in the Commonwealth a regulator with actual expertise in cannabis science and cannabis policy making, not something that, it says, oh, let's just move it over here because it's better for me to make money on it. This is a hill I will die on all day long. You've seen me do it for 5 years. This is where we want it at CCA. We just spent millions of dollars as a Commonwealth building this state agency. Why would the Spanberger administration walk in and just flush that down the toilet and start over?
And ABC does not regulate the entire alcohol supply chain. They don't. They do not regulate all the barley farmers or all of that. They regulate breweries and retail in the state of Virginia, and to a certain degree, certain things about alcohol that's manufactured within the state of Virginia. But they are not. They're not a medical program, and they're not a plant-based botanical soup to nuts type of program. It's a very different situation and very different products. And ABC also only works with federally legal products. They do not work with federally illegal products. And cannabis needs to be treated as the special beast that it is.
It's true. It's so true. So of all of these things, I think this bill is weird. It's very clear that there are moneyed interests tied to it. There's clearly some political agenda with it. I love Senator Lucas, but I don't like this bill. And we're going to see what happens with it. So if you all have questions about the bills as we move forward, you can always email us and ask us. We will continue talking about these and all the other bills that are moving through state legislatures on Live with NORML, which we do mostly Fridays at 4 p.m. Although sometimes we have to be in committee, and I can't give that up to to talk about what's going on in another state house. So make sure you're subscribed to NORML News. Head to norml.org, put your email in. You'll always know what's going on in your state and in Virginia, if that's where you are, with cannabis policy. You can always reach out to us at norml.org and ask any questions. And if it's for Sheba, I'm going to pass it to Sheba. And if it's for Nigist, I'm going to pass it to Nigist. And we're going to do our best to make sure that you are educated and informed cannabis consumers, cannabis policy advocates, and we're going to keep fighting to protect your rights. We are NORML. We are the only organization out there that is dedicated solely to representing the rights and freedoms of responsible cannabis consumers. There are plenty of business organizations out there. There are a dime a dozen, and they will do great work advocating for your business. But there is no cannabis industry without cannabis consumers. And if we aren't prioritizing cannabis consumer interests in any of this effort, yes, the retail sales bills are about building businesses, but if you're putting your consumers last, you're already starting off on the wrong foot. We need to prioritize their interests and make sure that the models that we're building serve their safety needs, because consumers are part of the public just like everyone else. So when we're talking about public safety, we mean everybody, and that includes consumer safety. Nigist, Sheba, thank you so much for getting into this deep dive with me. I think we probably could talk about it for 2 more hours and still not have covered it all. But it's been quite a weekend. I know, Sheba, you're traveling, ready to get back to Virginia. Nigist, you're here freezing with me.
Yes, well, I'm freezing and snowed in. I could not leave my house, so appreciate that we already had virtual plans. But thanks everyone who braved the snow to attend, and also who still joined us virtually for this weekend. I know it was a challenging one.
Thank you. The heat just came back on in the hotel, so that's nice. It's not inconsistent. All right, friends. Sheba, any last words?
Trying to wait for them to stop the announcement. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's really important to kind of follow along, and especially if you see an action pop up, we need like some rapid responses. Sometimes things are changing and evolving every day. We got until about March 14th before session ends, but then there's also a veto session that comes up in April. I believe it's April 2nd, but don't count on my brain. It is shortly after session. The governor has the ability to go back and this is the process. This is a process that's going to be happening over the next couple months, and we need people to speak up, be engaged, get the correct information, because there's a lot of misinformation that goes out all the time. And you'll hear like a lot of people talk about different things. Every entity has their different perspectives on this. Some people want to keep pushing the date back and keep pushing the date back and keep pushing the date back because it makes them obsolete once this bill passes. But we are in this for the long haul, and it's really about the people who need to benefit from this. And you know, I obviously work on the criminal legal system side a lot, but the reason why I even got involved in this in the first place and read the first 500 and some page document is because Governor Northam put $25 million into the cannabis bill to start the expungement process. I've worked on expungement since about 1999. Yes, I'm still 25. I don't need y'all to try to do the math. Ignore it. But 1999 was when I first learned that Virginia had a ridiculous expungement process for people who were not convicted of crimes, not able to get any type of relief without going through a long process that was re-traumatizing, making them go back through a fingerprinting process, even though we have an APHIS system that always keeps their fingerprints on file if you're accused of a felony. So been working on that for quite some time, finally got it through the finish line, but expungement and cannabis separated and took on a life of its own, but I still was engaged because not only did my mother and my grandfather benefit from the medical cannabis program when they were both diagnosed with lung cancer, I have a lot of people who are still incarcerated for cannabis and cannabis adjacent offenses. So yes, we want to see people get involved and get the businesses and make the revenue, and also take advantage of these ancillary businesses like banking, like HVAC, like security, like marketing, whatever it is that you care about. Everybody does not have to own a dispensary. that is not, when we oversaturate the market with dispensary after dispensary, but we don't have our accounting books in order, it's going to fail. So think about other parts of the industry that are significant to make this a success. And I'll see y'all on the other side of this.
Amen. I'm just gonna end with one last thing. JM and Sheba have been working on these issues for a very long time, and for folks who are at the gala, we were spending some time, and Senator Eben received a Lifetime Achievement Award for all of the work that he had done over the course of his Senate career on this issue. But we're in the throes, but it is years and years and years and years and years of work that goes into this, and I just want to give a shout out to Sheba and JM who have been in this battle for a lot longer than any of us who've been in this room or on this call, and how gratifying it is to see the fruits of your efforts finally starting to pay off in these last 5 years. And I cannot wait to see what else we get done in this new administration and with this new Democratic majority. So thank you both for what you do.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here. And thank you to everyone who joined us for the 2026 Virginia Cannabis Conference. This concludes our presentations for this year's conference. We'll be back in 2027, and we'll have more content as often as we can right here on whatever channel you're watching, but most importantly on Live with NORML. So make sure you hit that follow, or subscribe button so you don't ever miss our content. Make sure you're subscribed to our emails at norml.org. And if you are not a member yet of Virginia NORML or of NORML, please go ahead and get your membership card. You can go to norml.org/join. You can go to vanormal.org/join. Make sure you join both. Or if you're in another state, make sure you join your state chapter as well. Get involved and help us change cannabis policy for everyone, not just here in Virginia with Virginia NORML, but help us at NORML bring cannabis freedom to everyone across America. I'm J.M. Padini. Let's try that again. I'm J.M. Padini, the Development Director here at the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Thanks so much for joining us. And as always, I'll see you back here next time. Bye-bye.